Welcome back, you night owls. Tonight we wander into an era of lace, velvet drapes, and secrets that hum softly beneath the polished surface of Victorian respectability. You find yourself in a candlelit parlour, where the air smells faintly of rosewater and paraffin. A clock ticks with stubborn punctuality, and the hush of propriety presses against the walls like an extra layer of wallpaper. Outside, carriage wheels rattle over cobblestone. Inside, the real drama begins, not on stage or in the pages of a Gothic novel, but in the quiet consulting rooms where nervous women are told they're ill with something called hysteria. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're listening right now, tell me where you are in the world and what time it is where you are. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hem, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You drift deeper into the glow of the 19th century, where every detail of life is draped in a moral code so tight it squeaks. Women wear corsets that steal the breath right from their ribs. Men wear waistcoats stiff enough to stop a bullet. The empire rules a fifth of the planet, and yet, in its grand drawing rooms, even the word leg is considered too intimate to utter aloud. You don't say bathroom, you say the necessary. You don't discuss the human body, you discuss nerves. Everything physical, everything emotional, everything natural is wrapped in euphemism and tied with a silk bow. It's in this prudish cocoon that the first whispers of female hysteria begin to circulate like an invisible perfume. Doctors with impressive beards and even more impressive Latin vocabulary start describing an epidemic among middle and upper-class women. The symptoms, practically everything. Fatigue, irritability, anxiety, insomnia, weeping spells, daydreaming, loss of appetite, excessive appetite, melancholy, euphoria, rebelliousness, boredom, you name it. If a woman seemed unhappy, passionate, outspoken, or simply tired of embroidery and piano practice, a diagnosis awaited her. The medical journals of the time are full of phrases like wandering womb, uterine irritability, and nervous congestion. You can almost hear the doctors muttering as they write, "Yes, yes, it's clearly the uterus acting up again." Imagine being alive then, how every expression of feeling is a potential symptom. You can't be too quiet, that's depression, nor too chatty, that's agitation. You can't show too much interest in anything that isn't domestic, that's deviance. And heaven forbid you be passionate or independent-minded. That might require immediate medical intervention. It's absurd enough to make you laugh softly into your teacup, though it's the kind of laughter that hides a lump in the throat. The mainstream fact that anchors you here is this: hysteria was among the most commonly diagnosed female conditions of the 19th century. Medical historians estimate that tens of thousands of women across Europe and America were treated for it. Hospitals had wards for nervous disorders, and private clinics specialized in the condition. Yet even as the doctors took meticulous notes, they couldn't define it precisely. One physician complained that no two cases of hysteria are alike, which didn't stop him, or anyone else, from treating it with tremendous confidence. Behind these respectable diagnoses lurks a stranger truth. The so-called cure involved something that everyone pretended not to notice. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. For now, you stand in that early Victorian twilight when science and superstition shake hands politely, and propriety serves as both curtain and cage. You stroll through London's medical quarter, those narrow lanes off Harley Street where brass plaques gleam beside polished doors. Inside, a physician in a starched collar takes tea while reading a new treatise on female nervous excitability. He believes, quite sincerely, that women's reproductive organs are the epicenter of their emotional world. To him, a uterus is less a body part and more a mischievous tenant prone to wandering about the body causing chaos. The idea traces back to ancient Greece when Hippocrates suggested the womb could move upward and strangle the heart or lungs. Centuries later, Victorians revived this belief under a veneer of modern anatomy. The logic is ancient, only the wallpaper has changed. You can almost picture the examination rooms: plush chaise lounges, fainting couches, the rustle of skirts, the clink of surgical instruments that look like art pieces. A nurse, chaperone, or sometimes the patient's own maid stands by the door, eyes fixed on the wallpaper to preserve decorum. The doctor mutters about nerve congestion and pelvic heaviness, scribbling with a gold-tipped pen. He prescribes rest, diet, and sometimes what he calls pelvic massage therapy. It's described clinically in Latinized detachment. as a way to stimulate paroxysm. The result, though unspoken, is the very thing the polite society refuses to name. You're starting to see how absurdly tangled it all was. The entire medical establishment managed to invent a treatment for women's frustration that depended on denying what it really was. The patient wasn't supposed to know, the doctor wasn't supposed to know, and heaven help the journalist who tried to write it plainly. A quirky tidbit whispers from the archives. Some physicians kept sandbags in their offices to strengthen their hands. The manual massage therapy could last hours, and fatigue was considered an occupational hazard. So they trained like pianists before a concert, flexing fingers to prevent cramp. One journal from the 1880s even jokes that the practitioner's hand becomes the true stethoscope of feminine tranquility. You can't help smirking. Somewhere between the lace curtains and moral sermons, someone realized this was the most peculiar exercise routine in medicine. Yet even in their stiffness, these doctors believed they were rescuing women from madness. And maybe, in a twisted way, some patients agreed. The process, whatever it was, often left them calmer, lighter, restored. It was the only socially sanctioned context in which a woman might feel physical release without shame. But that, of course, could never be said aloud. Historians still debate whether most doctors genuinely misunderstood what they were doing, or whether they simply chose not to admit it, the silence serving as a shield for everyone involved. Meanwhile, society itself was restless. You feel it pulsing under the wallpaper, this suppressed current of yearning. The industrial age brings new machines, new theories, new fears. Electricity hums through the cities, and with it comes fascination with anything mechanical and modern. Progress becomes the word of the century, and every respectable man wants to be seen as part of it. So even in medicine, new instruments appear, vibrating chairs, hydrotherapy tables, electrostimulators, all promising to regulate nerves and rebalance the mysterious humours of the body. None of it quite works, but the confidence is dazzling. You step into a pharmacy window glowing with blue glass bottles and brass instruments. Among the tonics and tinctures sits a discreet advertisement for the relief of nervous ladies, consultations daily. Behind that polite phrasing lies an entire shadow industry of treatments that blend anatomy, ignorance and desire into a profitable cocktail. There's something almost tragicomic about it all. You can sense that many of these women are simply lonely, bored or trapped in suffocating domesticity. Their husbands work long hours, their social lives revolve around propriety and pretense. They aren't allowed to travel alone or pursue higher learning. Their emotional lives are locked in glass cabinets. So when a doctor in a fine suit tells them they have a medical condition that can be treated privately, in a clean room, with the promise of feeling renewed, they believe him. Wouldn't you if every other door was closed? You walk with one such patient, let's call her Clara, through the damp London fog. Her hands tremble not from illness but from exhaustion. She spends her days hosting teas, embroidering initials on linen, managing servants and smiling through migraines. When she confides to her husband that she feels restless and melancholy, he consults the family doctor. A week later, she's told she has hysteria of the womb. She nods, relieved to have a name for it. Names, after all, make suffering respectable. At her appointment, the doctor speaks kindly, even paternally. He avoids eye contact, explaining the process in terms that sound vaguely mechanical. She lies on a padded couch while he works with steady professionalism. She leaves flushed but tranquil, as though a weight has lifted. At dinner, her husband remarks that she seems more herself. The doctor's bill is high, but what is money compared to domestic peace? From your modern vantage point, it's easy to smirk at the absurdity, but step carefully. These moments contain real pain, real confusion. The women of that age had almost no vocabulary for desire or depression. Their emotions were filtered through religious morality, and gender roles so rigid they left bruises on the psyche. So hysteria became a kind of collective language for everything unspeakable. Loneliness, frustration, trauma, yearning. It was a diagnosis shaped less by medicine than by culture itself. In one corner of the story, a few radical voices begin to whisper dissent. A French neurologist, Jean-Martin Charcot, starts photographing his patients during hysterical fits, suggesting that the illness might originate in the mind rather than the womb. His images of contorted women in white hospital gowns scandalise polite society but fascinate artists like Toulouse-Lautrec. Across the channel, British doctors read his work with suspicion. The debate grows. Is hysteria physical, emotional, or, heaven forbid, sexual? The answer, of course, depends on whom you ask. Historians today still can't fully agree on whether these doctors were cynics or victims of their own repression. Some argue they genuinely believed in the therapeutic power of nervous release, interpreting physiological response as proof of success. Others suspect they knew exactly what they were doing but hid behind Latin terminology and medical decorum. You can imagine the conversations over brandy at gentlemen's clubs. Awkward laughter, knowing glances, a shared unspoken understanding. As the fire crackles low, you lean back and consider the irony. An empire prided on conquering the globe couldn't even face the geography of the human body without flinching. The same civilization that engineered steamships and telegraphs built its medical ethics on denial. Beneath the lace and Latin, it's all just fear. Fear of woman's autonomy, fear of emotion, fear of pleasure itself. And yet, from that fear grew innovation. The hysteria cure indirectly inspired some of the earliest electrical appliances designed for home use. The line between medical device and personal gadget blurred faster than polite society could keep up. Within a few decades, what began as a clinical tool would become something much more private, much more revealing about the Victorian soul. You glance once more around the room, the lace curtains, the ticking clock, the silence that seems to hum louder than the street outside. A patient exhales softly, a doctor wipes his brow, and the entire empire carries on pretending that nothing happened. You can't help but smile, softly, sleepily, at the sheer human comedy of it all, because beneath the absurdity you sense something universal, the lengths to which people will go to disguise desire as duty, to turn emotion into diagnosis, to rename longing as illness. The Victorians, with their stiff collars and fluttering fans, weren't so different from us after all. You wake up in the faint glow of a coal fire, the air thick with the scent of starch and lavender polish. A maid draws the curtains, revealing another grey London morning, and outside the carriages rattle past like iron insects. Somewhere a bell tolls 9. You are a woman of means, which means you have leisure, and therefore, apparently, you have hysteria. The diagnosis hangs in the parlour air like a perfume no one dares name. By now, hysteria has become the century's favourite explanation for nearly everything that troubles the female half of humanity. You can't sleep? Hysteria. You sleep too much? Hysteria. You faint, cry, argue, or want to paint landscapes instead of bearing children? Definitely hysteria. You may not even know you have it until a man with medical credentials politely tells you that you do. This strange epidemic spreads not by contagion but by conversation. Society women whisper it over tea. Physicians publish case studies about it. Journalists speculate on its causes. The diagnosis grows into its practically a cultural fashion statement. To be hysterical is to be interesting, delicate, complex, a sort of tragic heroine in need of rescue. You almost envy yourself for being so refined as to require professional attention. The mainstream fact is stark. In the 19th century, hysteria was considered a legitimate medical condition by nearly every Western doctor. It appeared in textbooks, medical dictionaries and journals with the same seriousness as tuberculosis or cholera. The British Medical Journal and the Lancet devoted pages to it, debating its causes with the gravity of theologians discussing sin. The womb, they claimed, was the source of all trouble. It was both organ and oracle, mysterious, powerful, and occasionally, in their view, ungovernable. You picture the diagrams, delicate line drawings of female anatomy, labelled with Latin names that make the most natural things sound sinister. The womb is depicted as a restless creature capable of migration. If a woman feels chest pain, perhaps the womb has risen toward the heart. If she's short of breath, it may be pressing on her lungs. Coax it back to its rightful place through massage, bars, or, in extreme cases, marriage. Because, of course, matrimony was always the ultimate medicine. The absurdity is almost poetic. You can hear the doctors speaking in tones of deep conviction. "Madam, your uterus is causing you melancholy." The patient, confused but obedient, nods. Who is she to question science? After all, the man wears a frock coat and quotes Latin. His office smells of pipe smoke and leather-bound books. Authority itself seems to emanate from his whiskers, but beneath that confidence lurks insecurity. The Victorian medical profession is still defining itself, struggling to replace old folk remedies with modern science. Physicians crave respect. They want to be seen as moral guardians, not mere tradesmen. So they lean on the appearance of logic, even when their theories wobble. Hysteria becomes their catch-all answer, scientific enough to sound credible, vague enough to apply to anyone. You glance around the parlour again. Everything about the era conspires to make women anxious. Corsets pinch ribs and restrict breathing. Diets of boiled vegetables and faint tea leave them weak. Their education is ornamental. Music, French, embroidery, skills meant to attract suitors, not to nourish intellect. Once married, they're confined to domestic routines that blend monotony with emotional starvation. They are forbidden most professions, discouraged from reading too much, and constantly reminded that their worth lies in obedience and fertility. So, when the inevitable happens, when boredom curdles into restlessness, when loneliness turns into exhaustion, the physician arrives with his stethoscope and solemnly declares that the problem lies in her womb. Not in the marriage, not in the culture, not in the suffocating social script, but in her own anatomy. The perfect self-contained explanation. A quirky tidbit slips into the tale here in one popular medical manual from the 1850s. The author suggested that hysteria might also arise from excessive reading of novels. It was thought that emotional stimulation from literature could unsettle a woman's fragile nerves. So, in a sense, Jane Austen and the Brontes were considered dangerous. Too much fiction might cause a real disorder. You almost laugh aloud at the idea of banning books for fear of emotional literacy. Another physician took a different view. He believed hysteria stemmed from retained emotions, that women simply weren't expressing themselves enough. His prescription? Weeping. Yes, he advised daily crying sessions, calling tears a natural purifier of the female constitution. You can almost imagine him handing out handkerchiefs like prescriptions, 2 sobs in the morning, 1 before bed. Yet, as ridiculous as it sounds, these beliefs shaped real lives. Women were sent to rest homes, confined to their bedrooms, fed milk and broth, and forbidden to write letters or read. Some lay in bed for months, surrounded by soft cushions and sterility. A few famous patients, like the writer Charlotte Perkins Gilman, endured this very treatment and later wrote about its cruelty. Her short story The Yellow Wallpaper remains one of the most haunting protests against it. A woman locked in a room, driven slowly mad by the silence that men call healing. Historians still wrestle with what hysteria really was. Was it, as some suggest, the only way women could express rebellion in a world that silenced them? Was it a language of protest disguised as illness? Or was it simply the medicalization of unhappiness for longing? The answer changes depending on which diary, hospital record, or confession you read. What's certain is that hysteria became the mirror in which Victorians, and you look at the ways that you look like anything that you want to listen to, and he adjusts his spectacles and writes in his ledger, patient exhibits emotional instability and fits of weeping. Diagnosis, hysterical disturbance of the nerves. He feels proud, scientific, modern. In another reflection, you see the patient herself, young, pale, eyes darting with embarrassment. She doesn't feel ill exactly, just restless. The world tells her she shouldn't want more than she has, and yet she does. But since desire cannot be spoken, it translates into symptoms: fainting, trembling, shortness of breath. The diagnosis is both sentence and permission. She is sick, therefore excused. The scene shifts. You're in Paris now, in a lecture hall where Jean-Martin Charcot demonstrates a hysterical seizure to a crowd of students. His patient, a young woman in a hostel gown, convulses under gaslight. Cameras click, sketches are made. He calls it La Grande Attaque Hystérique, the great hysterical fit. The audience applauds as if they've seen a performance. You feel uneasy watching the boundaries between science and spectacle blur. The Victorians prided themselves on their rationality, yet the concept of hysteria betrays how irrational their worldview truly was. They believed in ghosts of the womb, migrating organs, and moral contagion. They feared what they could not measure, especially if it wore a corset and spoke its mind. The diagnosis served as both leash and comfort blanket. It reassured men that women's emotions could be explained, controlled, cured. They reassured women that their pain was real, even if misnamed. And yet, quietly the cracks began to show. By the 1870s, a few daring female physicians, rare as comets in that sky, start to question the idea. Dr. Elizabeth Garrett Anderson in England, Dr. Mary Putnam Jacobi in America. They publish essays arguing that women's nervous disorders are not moral failings or wandering wombs, but symptoms of exhaustion and social pressure. They speak carefully, because one misstep could ruin their careers, but the tremor of truth runs through their words. You sense the future faintly in their voices. Still, the old theories persist. Physicians continue to recommend treatments that sound almost theatrical. Some prescribe horseback riding to shake up the internal organs, purely for medical reasons, of course. Others suggest cold baths, electric belts, or specialized diets of custard and raw eggs. Each cure is more elaborate than the last, and none address the root cause, that women are suffocating inside lives too small for their minds. You picture a late-night scene in a country estate. A woman sits by the window, staring at the moon, her hands clasped in her lap. Her husband sleeps soundly beside her, snoring through the heavy silence. She feels a pressure in her chest, not from disease but from longing. Tomorrow she'll tell the doctor about it, and he'll nod sagely, saying, "Ah, the nerves again." He'll prescribe the usual: rest, quiet, perhaps a course of massage therapy. She'll comply because that's what one does. But inside, something restless and luminous remains. It's tempting to mock it all, yet you can't help but feel a strange tenderness toward these long-dead patients and their misguided doctors. They were fumbling in the dark, seeking explanations with the tools they had. In a world that feared the body, they turned desire into pathology and healing into ritual. There's something almost poetic about how the boundaries between the two blurred. And as you drift in that dim candlelight of history, you realize how much of it still lingers. The notion that a woman's emotions must have a diagnosis. The way society still pathologizes what it can't comprehend. You think of modern equivalents: stress, burnout, oversensitivity, new names for old unease. The ghosts of hysteria still haunt the language of health. One last image stays with you: a physician's waiting room lined with velvet chairs. On the wall hangs a placard reading, "Consultations for Nervous Ladies." You hear footsteps in the hallway, the creak of a door, the faint clink of instruments being arranged. Outside, rain begins to fall, steady, relentless, cleansing. Inside, the silence continues, filled with the soft sound of civilization pretending not to tremble. You find yourself walking through the humming arteries of the industrial age. London exhales soot and ambition in equal measure, and everywhere you look, the world seems to be reinventing itself. Steam engines thunder down iron tracks, typewriters clatter in offices, and gas lamps burn like bottled stars along the boulevards. The city pulses with invention, but not all inventions are meant for public view. Some are quietly designed for the privacy of the parlour or the curtained corner of a doctor's practice, humming softly beneath the polite din of progress. In this age of brass and optimism, science is a religion, and technology its altar. Every respectable gentleman dreams of building something that hisses, vibrates, or sparkles with electricity. The newspapers are full of new contraptions: mechanical looms, pneumatic drills, sewing machines, phonographs. There is no problem that can't be solved by gears, steam, or galvanic current. And so, when doctors complain that their hands ache from the physical labour of curing hysteria, it's only a matter of time before an engineer offers to help. This, you realise, is how the mechanical age accidentally invents the first proto-vibrators. The idea doesn't arise from scandal or indulgence, it's born out of tedium and sore wrists. Physicians complain about the manual fatigue of performing hours of pelvic therapy. In the language of the day, that means it takes too long to induce the therapeutic paroxysm. The sessions can last anywhere from 15 minutes to over an hour, and doctors, many of whom run busy urban practices, grumble that they simply don't have the stamina for it. Enter the tinkering spirit of the 1880s. In workshops filled with oil, copper wire, and the smell of singed cloth, engineers begin to devise instruments that can reproduce rhythmic motion more efficiently than human hands. Their early devices look like something between a coffee grinder and a dentist's drill. They're powered by foot treadles, water pressure, or even small steam engines. A few are so heavy they have to be mounted to the floor. But they work, or at least they seem to. And they come with the added benefit of letting the physician maintain that critical air of detachment. After all, it's the machine doing the work now, not him. The mainstream historical fact that pulses beneath this scene is simple. By the late 19th century, mechanical massage devices were genuinely marketed to medical professionals as tools for treating hysteria. The first known steam-powered apparatus for this purpose is credited to Dr. Mannion. Joseph Mortimer Granville, an English physician, who invented what he called the parquet, or Granville's hammer, around 1880. He claimed it was meant for muscle pain and neurology, but its swift adoption by gynecologists suggested a different sort of utility. Granville himself later protested, insisting that his device was never intended for use upon women's reproductive organs. His outrage, though loud, did little to stop others from doing precisely that. You can almost see him in his workshop, sleeves rolled up, muttering as the small engine wheezes. Steam hisses through brass tubes, the piston rises and falls in neat rhythm. To him it's a triumph of engineering precision, but to the doctors who quietly buy his device, it's salvation from fatigue, from impropriety, from the awkwardness of manual labour cloaked in medical language. The mechanical assistant, as it's politely called, brings efficiency to an already absurd business. There's a quirky anecdote from a medical exhibition in London in 1883. One demonstrator, eager to prove his invention's versatility, attached it to a metal frame and showed that it could stimulate the nerves of any limb. The audience applauded politely, unaware, or pretending not to know, that the device's most popular application was far more specific. Imagine the smothered giggles of a few younger doctors in the crowd, the stiff expressions of their elders, and the shared understanding that this is progress, and progress must never be questioned. Historians still argue whether the adoption of these machines was truly innocent, or whether everyone involved simply agreed to a collective blindness. After all, the Victorians had perfected the art of attending. They could fill entire libraries with euphemism. A treatment that would scandalise the church could be rendered respectable with a Latin name and a polished brass casing. And so, with straight faces and impeccable manners, physicians embraced mechanical innovation as if it were just another sign of civilization's upward march. You walk now through one of these new clinics, a converted townhouse with high ceilings and the faint smell of disinfectant and coal smoke. A waiting room's filled with women reading magazines, their gloved hands trembling slightly. In the next room, a doctor prepares his device. The machine sits on a wooden stand connected to a small boiler. Steam begins to rise, puffing rhythmically. There's a gentle vibration that fills the air, like the purring of an enormous cat. To any outsider, it's merely technology at work. Modern, clean, efficient. But within these walls, another kind of revolution is underway. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the century exhaling. For decades, physicians have framed female emotion as pathology. Now, through these mechanical treatments, they've found a socially acceptable outlet for something no one dares name. Patients report feeling lighter, calmer, even joyful. They say the sessions bring relief from tension, clarity of mind, ease of breathing. Medical journals chalk this up to restored nervous equilibrium. But beneath the jargon, it's clear the body knows what it needs, even when language refuses to admit it. One patient's diary from 1889 describes the experience in delicate code. The procedure is quite fatiguing, yet when it concludes I find myself laughing without cause and sleeping soundly that night. The doctor assures me my nerves are improving. You imagine her handwriting, curled, proper, and trembling at the edges. It's not deceit exactly, it's survival. In a culture where even marital intimacy is cloaked in embarrassment, the clinic becomes a strange sanctuary. Meanwhile, the rest of the world hums forward. Telegraphs click, locomotives shriek, and electricity begins to thread its way into homes and hospitals. By the 1890s, new models of the mechanical massager are powered not by steam but by electricity. This means they can be smaller, quieter, and more discreet. The hum of progress slips behind closed doors, and with it, the treatment becomes even easier to disguise. In New York, an enterprising American physician files a patent for an electromechanical nerve stimulator. The paperwork is careful to avoid any hint of impropriety, describing it as a device for the relief of muscular fatigue and hysteria. The patent is approved without question. Within a few years, the design will be sold commercially under gentler names: health vibrator, nerve reviver, personal massager. You find it almost funny that one of the earliest home appliances marketed to women, before even the vacuum cleaner, was this very invention. But the real comedy lies in the language. The advertisements are masterpieces of avoidance. Restores circulation, revives weary organs, brings soothing comfort to delicate constitutions. Not one word ever hints at pleasure. In a society that can build an empire but can't say the word orgasm, the euphemism itself becomes an art form. And yet, not everyone is amused. Moralists begin to mutter that medicine is straying too close to indecency. Clergymen preach against overstimulation of the nerves. The newspapers, when they dare to mention it, do so with arch irony. One satirical column in Punch jokes that London's women are suffering from a peculiar epidemic of overcured nerves. Behind the humour, you sense anxiety, a creeping realisation that technology has blurred the line between therapy and taboo. Still, the medical profession holds firm. Doctors defend their methods with solemn phrases about anatomy and propriety. One even argues that mechanical stimulation prevents more dangerous excitations by providing controlled relief in a clinical setting. It's a breathtaking bit of mental gymnastics, almost elegant in its absurdity. The Victorians have managed to turn pleasure into medicine, without ever admitting the pleasure exists. You linger on that contradiction, watching the steam curl upward from the machine. There's beauty in the hypocrisy, in how completely the century ties itself into knots to avoid acknowledging the obvious. The very people who insist that women are fragile, passionless beings are now building machines to correct their supposed lack of balance. The society that forbids touch invents an entire industry of mechanical intimacy. It's as if the collective unconscious of the era is whispering through gears and copper wires, confessing what polite mouths never will. A small, ironic smile crosses your face. You realise that in its own strange way, this medical practice gave some women their only consistent experience of bodily autonomy. They couldn't speak their desires, but their bodies could respond. The treatment that was meant to suppress emotion instead revealed it. The clinic became a quiet rebellion, humming beneath the corseted order of things. Historians still debate whether the doctors truly believed in the physical cure, or whether they recognised, at least dimly, that they were facilitating something else entirely. Letters from physicians hint at discomfort. One London practitioner confided in a colleague that his treatments left him feeling curiously fatigued and morally unsettled. Another complained that his patients seemed too eager to return. You can almost hear the unease. They were medical men trapped between science and sanctimony, servants of a system that rewarded ignorance and punished honesty. The irony deepens as you realise how closely these developments mirror the broader industrial transformation. The steam engines that power trains and factories now pulse quietly in the service of human repression. The age of progress has mechanised everything, even desire. It's an almost poetic symmetry: steam and skin, gears and size, brass and blush. You step out into the fog again. The city feels alive, breathing through chimneys and street lamps. Somewhere, a doctor's machine hisses behind closed shutters. Somewhere else, a woman feels, perhaps for the first time, something she cannot name. The wheels of industry turn, and with them, the hidden machinery of the human heart. It strikes you then that the Victorians, for all their prudishness, were more entangled with sensuality than they ever admitted. Their oppression wasn't ignorance, it was obsession disguised as denial. They catalogued the female body in anatomical detail, wrote thousands of pages about its instabilities, and built elaborate devices to manage its responses. Every effort to suppress desire only made it more visible, humming beneath the surface like a hidden engine. As you drift through that iron and steam world, you begin to feel its rhythm, a heartbeat of machinery and morality, pulsing together in uneasy harmony. The city is both workshop and confession booth, every invention a little window into the soul of an anxious empire. And in one quiet room, under the steady whir of brass and steam, the most paradoxical therapy of the age continues. Half science, half secret, all human. The first thing you notice is the hush. Not the silence of peace, but the curated quiet of repression, the kind that feels heavy, like air thickened with perfume impropriety. You're standing inside a Victorian examination room, surrounded by starched linens and mahogany cabinets. A lamp burns low, its flame trapped behind a frosted glass globe, and shadows stretch long across the parquet floor. Everything in the room whispers respectability, as if the furniture itself has signed a moral code. Yet beneath that veneer of order, a subtle tension hums, an unspoken awareness that something intimate, something physical, is about to happen but cannot ever be named as such. This is the era's great paradox, an age obsessed with modesty that can't stop peeking through its own keyholes. Women are told to be chaste, delicate and silent, while men, especially doctors, are granted authority to gaze, diagnose and touch under the sacred seal of science. Here, morality and medicine dance a slow, uncomfortable waltz, each pretending not to lead. The mainstream historical fact is clear enough. Victorian medicine claimed to be the guardian of virtue even as it intruded into the most private realms of life. Modesty was considered not just etiquette but ethics. A woman's body was something to be shielded, hidden even from herself. The culture of the time made it practically taboo for women to look at, speak about, or even acknowledge certain parts of their anatomy. So when treatment required examination, doctors developed elaborate rituals to preserve a fiction of innocence. A proper physician would begin by reassuring his patient that the procedure was purely mechanical. You might call it nerve adjustment, pelvic massage, or vibratory therapy. The words were chosen with surgical precision. Clean, cold, denatured of anything sensual. Before the session began, he would carefully draw a curtain, ask the patient to recline, and position a linen drape over her skirts. Sometimes the lights were dimmed. Sometimes the physician stood behind the curtain, as though the cloth itself could sanctify the act. It was an absurd theatre of decency, yet everyone performed their role with grave sincerity. The doctor's tone remained calm, detached, paternal. The patient's eyes stayed averted. The assistant, if present, was instructed to keep silent. What occurred in those rooms were not, officially, pleasure, or even contact between man and woman. It was medicine, pure and holy, enacted in a language so formal it almost disguised the tremor beneath it. But history, with its cruel sense of humour, never lets these contradictions stay buried. A quirky tidbit from a surviving London medical ledger tells of a certain Dr. H, who became so concerned about accidental impropriety that he invented a screen made of 3 folding panels. The patient sat on one side, the doctor reached through a small curtained aperture, and thus modesty was preserved. You picture it like some bizarre puppet theatre of restraint, a hand, gloved and trembling slightly, emerging from a curtain to perform its sacred duty, while both parties pretend this is the height of decorum. Still, even with these precautions, embarrassment lurked like a draft in every room. Doctors wrote anxious essays about maintaining propriety in gynecological practice, full of sentences that twist themselves into moral knots. One surgeon suggested that during examinations, the physician should avoid conversation of a familiar nature and allow the eyes to rest upon neutral objects. Another insisted that no gentleman should perform more than one such treatment per patient per day, lest the nerves become overstimulated. You almost want to laugh, except the earnestness makes it sad. You can feel the societal pressure pressing down on everyone involved. Women are trapped in their prescribed fragility, taught that virtue equals silence. Men are trapped in their authority, forbidden from admitting any awareness of the humanity, the sensuality, of their patients. Both sides live behind masks. And the doctor's office becomes a strange confessional booth, where physical release masquerades as moral discipline. Historians still puzzle over how deeply this denial ran. Did the doctors truly not recognize the nature of the reaction they were inducing? Or did they know perfectly well and simply rely on the armour of euphemism? Letters and diaries suggest both possibilities. Some practitioners describe the therapeutic paroxysm as a curious but harmless nervous discharge, comparable to a sneeze or muscle spasm. Others, more cynical perhaps, wrote with hints of wry humour, as if fully aware of the charade. One even joked that his waiting room was the most contented queue in London. You think of the patients, those women who entered the clinics pale and restless, clutching their lace handkerchiefs, and left with colour in their cheeks and calm in their eyes. They were told they were being cured of illness, but they must have known, at least some of them, that what they experienced was something else. Maybe they couldn't name it, or maybe they simply chose not to. After all, language itself was against them. Words like pleasure, desire, and satisfaction belong to the realm of sin or poetry, never medicine. There's an unsettling beauty in the silence that fills these rooms. The steady rhythm of breath, the hiss of gaslight, the faint ticking of a wall clock, all of it conspires to make the forbidden seem ordinary. The walls themselves hold their breath. You imagine one of these sessions from your vantage point, second person, floating just above the scene like an unseen witness. The doctor adjusts his spectacles, his face expressionless. The patient closes her eyes. The machine hums softly, brass fittings trembling like a clockwork heart. The sound fills the room, steady and mechanical, while the rest of the city carries on outside. Omnibuses rolling, chimneys smoking, bells tolling noon. If this were a painting, it would be rendered in muted tones, sepia, amber, a hint of blue-grey. The composition would hide the act itself, showing only gestures, shadows and expressions. The doctor's hand frozen mid-motion, the woman's face turned toward the dim light. Lips parted not in sin but in surrender to something larger than decorum. The medical gaze of the Victorian era was not neutral. It was shaped by power, by gender, by the unspoken rules of who gets to look and who must be looked at. In a sense, every examination was an act of narrative control. The doctor wrote the story, the patient's body became the text. Every sigh, every tremor, every flutter of the pulse was interpreted through his vocabulary, his moral frame. And so, the female body, once private, mysterious and self-contained, became a public site of diagnosis and authority. You feel the cold edge of irony in this. A culture that demanded women hide themselves simultaneously built an entire science dedicated to studying them. They were not allowed to speak of their own experiences, but their bodies were endlessly spoken about. The medical gaze, as later theorists would call it, was a way of turning intimacy into data, desire into diagnosis. A small but revealing anecdote circulates among Victorian scholars. In one anatomy lecture at Guy's Hospital, a professor insisted on using a veiled mannequin rather than a real cadaver when women were present in the audience. The sight of the naked human form, he said, might excite improper curiosity. Yet these same men spent hours dissecting actual women's corpses for study, declaring it an act of scientific devotion. You can't help but shake your head. The contradiction is so monumental it feels almost architectural. The most unsettling part, though, is how easily everyone believed they were being virtuous. The era's moral codes were so deeply internalized that even small gestures of rebellion felt dangerous. A woman who asked too many questions about her own body risked being labelled immodest, or worse, hysterical. Knowledge itself became subversive. You picture a young wife timidly asking her physician what exactly the treatment entails. He smiles condescendingly and assures her, "It's merely to restore your balance, my dear. The less you know, the better." And she nods, grateful for his kindness, never realizing she's being taught to confuse ignorance with purity. Historians still debate whether the patients were victims, collaborators, or quiet revolutionaries. Perhaps they were all three at once. Some found genuine comfort in the treatments, both physical and emotional. Some, especially those trapped in unloving marriages, saw in the doctor's professionalism a rare glimpse of gentleness. And some, though their names are lost, must have understood the farce completely, playing along because it gave them what no prayer or potion could. It's almost tragic that the culture had to disguise healing as hysteria and desire as disease. If only someone had dared to say aloud what was happening, to acknowledge that pleasure need not be sinful, that emotion need not be pathological. The entire edifice of repression might have cracked open decades earlier. But silence was safer. The hypocrisy held society together like the stays of a corset, constricting, painful, yet perversely reassuring. You drift now through the corridors of that world, the endless rows of medical offices, the parlours converted into consulting rooms, the clinics with their curtained cubicles. The faint clatter of instruments echoes from room to room. Behind each door, the same ritual repeats. Diagnosis, procedure, relief, denial. Over and over like clockwork. Outside, the empire is conquering continents. Inside, it is conquering its own conscience. The steamships and telegraphs of the outer world are mirrored by these smaller, secret machines of the inner world, each one a symbol of progress tinged with repression. And in the strange intersection of morality and mechanics, the boundaries of the body and the limits of propriety are quietly redrawn. By the time the lamps are extinguished and the last patient leaves, the air still trembles faintly from the hum of the machine. The doctor wipes his hands, straightens his collar, and records another successful treatment in his ledger. The patient steps into her carriage, cheeks flushed, posture relaxed, eyes shiny. Neither will ever speak of what happened, and yet both will return, each seeking something the language of their century cannot yet define. You awaken to the smell of ozone and oil, in a workshop where iron lungs and velvet decorum breathe the same air. It's late in the century now, the 1880s, that conflict decade when invention feels like a divine calling. London, New York and Paris hum with progress. Electricity crackles through copper wires, and the human imagination hums right alongside it. Everything is becoming mechanical. Time, speech, travel, even intimacy. You stand amid shelves of brass fittings, polished gears and cold springs, where one of the strangest revolutions in medicine is quietly being born. It begins, as most revolutions do, with inconvenience. The doctors are tired. Not emotionally, physically. Decades of performing hysteria treatments by hand have taken their toll. Their wrists ache, their fingers cramp, and the sessions are, by their own reports, time-consuming and fatiguing. There's even a term in medical correspondence for it: therapeutic exhaustion. These are men of science, after all, not pianists or labourers. The notion that their hands might trouble from overwork is undignified. And so, with characteristic Victorian logic, they begin to ask, could a machine do this instead? The answer arrives in a puff of steam. The first documented device intended to automate the treatment of hysteria appears around 1880, courtesy of one Dr. Joseph Mortimer Granville. He's a proper London physician, with a fondness for innovation and an admirable talent for self-deception. His invention, the percuteur, also known as Granville's hammer, is designed to deliver rapid rhythmic percussion to the body. It looks like a polished pistol mated with a sewing machine, part laboratory instrument, part weapon of progress. Granville insists that it's purely for muscular pain, for nervous exhaustion, for the relief of rheumatism and fatigue. His medical demonstrations are sober, respectable, and utterly devoid of smirks. Yet within months, his invention begins to appear in gynecological clinics across England and America. He protests loudly. "I have never applied my invention to the treatment of the female organs," he declares in a letter to the Lancet. "I do not intend it for such purposes. But the market, like the human body, has a will of its own." Doctors quickly realize that Granville's device performs the hysteria treatment more efficiently, more consistently, and far less awkwardly than human hands ever could. The percuteur becomes an overnight sensation among the medical elite. The mainstream fact here is both comical and profound. Granville's hammer was one of the first electromechanical devices used in Western medicine, and though it was publicly marketed for general ailments, it privately became a cornerstone of hysteria treatment. It paved the way for an entire industry of vibratory massage equipment that would later move from clinic to household, from prescription to indulgence. You picture Granville's workshop dimly lit, a faint hiss of steam filling the air, copper pipes running along the walls. He tests the machine on his own arm, watching the muscle twitch. "Ah, splendid," he murmurs. A friend, perhaps another doctor, observes, "Might this not be of use for certain feminine complaints?" Granville stiffens, horrified by the implication. He insists on the purity of his science. But outside that workshop, the whispers have already begun. Within a decade, mechanical massagers begin to multiply. Some are powered by hand cranks, others by foot treadles. A few ingenious designs even connect to water taps, driven by the pressure of household plumbing. In the late 1880s, when electricity begins to flow into upper-class homes, the designs shrink dramatically. What once required a footman to operate now fits inside a small box with a coiled wire and a humming motor. The vibratory cure is officially born. You enter one of those clinics, an immaculate room with lace curtains and a humming dynamo in the corner. The doctor, his hair slicked with pomade, demonstrates the new electric model to a colleague. "Notice," he says, "how the oscillations maintain a perfect rhythm, no fatigue, no irregularity." He adjusts a lever, and the brass head buzzes faster, the sound like a swarm of obedient bees. The colleague nods gravely, jotting notes in a ledger. Behind them, a nurse sets out fresh lemon and oils scented faintly with camphor and rosewater. The ritual begins again, but now with a machine between them, a polite intermediary, a mechanical buffer that allows propriety to survive another decade. The quirky tidbit that often astonishes modern readers is that these devices were openly displayed at medical fairs and exhibitions, complete with demonstrations, but always described as nerve stimulators or circulatory aids. One American advertisement from 1890 proudly proclaims, "No lady needs suffer the discomforts of nervousness. The modern vibratory device restores vitality and composure." The accompanying illustration shows a serene woman reclining in a chair, eyes closed, as the machine, discreetly obscured by drapery, rests on her lap. The copy is exquisite in its vagueness, invigorates the system, promotes restful sleep. Recommended by physicians. It's easy to laugh now, but in that moment, these inventions represented the intersection of three of the Victorian age's greatest obsessions: morality, technology, and control. By mechanizing the treatment, society could keep pretending nothing scandalous was happening. The doctor could stand back, hands folded behind his back, as the machine did its rhythmic work. He might even take notes while the patient sighed softly, eyes closed, murmuring that she felt lighter. Science had provided the ultimate alibi. Historians still argue whether the inventors and physicians truly misunderstood what they had built. Some claim that Victorian doctors were genuinely ignorant of female anatomy and sexual response, so thoroughly insulated by taboo that they interpreted physiological reactions as mere nervous discharges. Others believe they knew exactly what they were doing, but hid behind the plausible deniability of medical language. In either case, the result was the same: a device that embodied the century's entire moral contradiction: purity pursued through machinery, pleasure disguised as therapy. You can almost see it from the patient's perspective. She arrives by carriage, gloves tight, bonnet perfectly arranged. The waiting room smells of wax polish and violets. When she's ushered into the treatment chamber, she feels both dread and relief. The doctor speaks gently. This new apparatus has proven most effective in relieving nervous tension. She nods, not quite meeting his eyes. The machine begins to hum, and for the next few minutes, propriety dissolves in the mechanical rhythm of progress. When it's over, she rises, cheeks flushed, pulse steady. "I feel restored," she whispers. The doctor smiles with clinical satisfaction. Another cure recorded, another unspoken truth preserved. What's most haunting is how ordinary it all became. The medical journals list these treatments without irony. One 1892 article describes them as a most beneficial stimulus to circulation in the female pelvis. Another recommends weekly sessions for the restoration of proper nerve balance. You find no hint of scandal, no trace of self-awareness. Just Latin phrases, measurements, and the calm authority of men who believe they're saving civilization one vibration at a time. The irony deepens when you realize that this medical normalization opened the door for mass marketing. By the turn of the century, home-use vibrators were being sold to middle-class women across Europe and America. The earliest catalogues of household appliances featured them alongside sewing machines, curling irons, and electric fans. "A boon to mothers and daughters alike," one ad reads, "bringing comfort to weary nerves after a long day's exertion." You almost admire the audacity of it. The design evolution is fascinating in its own right. Early models were massive, heavy steel casings, thick cords and pulleys. Later ones, powered by compact motors, became handheld. Some even featured interchangeable heads for general massage. One French manufacturer offered a deluxe version, encased in rosewood, marketed as a lady's personal health assistant. Its instruction manual contained careful illustrations showing how to stimulate circulation in the limbs and lower torso, with the strategic omission of any truly revealing detail. There's a charmingly absurd story from the 1899 Chicago World's Fair, where a company called Hamilton Beach demonstrated its electric medical massager. The device drew large crowds, mostly women, who marveled at its speed and quiet operation. The salesman described it as a domestic revolution. He was right, though not in the way he meant. In retrospect, you can see this entire phenomenon as a form of collective delusion, but a strangely compassionate one. Everyone involved, doctors, patients, inventors, needed a way to bridge the chasm between desire and decency. The machine became the bridge. It allowed women to experience release without guilt, and men to maintain their illusions of virtue. In its cold brass and whirring gears, the vibrator carried something profoundly human, the desperate ingenuity of repression. Was this a case of patriarchal control masquerading as science, or was it, paradoxically, an early form of sexual liberation, albeit one hidden beneath starched petticoats and medical lacquer? Some feminist scholars argue that these treatments gave women a rare space to feel agency, even if framed as illness. Others insist it was exploitation in mechanical disguise. The truth, as usual, lies somewhere in the fog between. You stand again in Granville's dim workshop, the machine cooling beside its boiler, the air filled with the faint scent of iron and lavender soap. The inventor sits at his desk, unaware that his contraption will someday appear not only in medical offices but in cinema, literature, and whispers between friends. He believes he has contributed to science, and perhaps in a strange way he has. He's given the world a tool that speaks more honestly about the human body than the age that birthed it ever could. Outside, the factory whistles blow, the new century stirs on the horizon. You feel the thrum of electricity in the air, the pulse of the modern world just beginning. It's both exhilarating and faintly ridiculous, this civilization of gears and guilt. The Victorians, in their moral panic and mechanical genius, have managed to invent the future while pretending it's all just medicine. You take one last look around the workshop, the shadowed shells, the gleaming brass, the silent waiting machines, and realise that in every gear and piston there's a secret heartbeat. The humming engines of progress and repression are the same machine, and the century's greatest invention isn't the vibrator itself, it's the elaborate lie that keeps it respectable. You step through a narrow doorway and into another world, one built not of brick and soot but of velvet drapery, polished brass and the faint perfume of camphor and rosewater. The lamps burn low, wrapped in frosted shades that make the room glow like amber honey. It's quiet here, almost reverent, as though you've entered a chapel devoted to the cult of mauves. The sign outside reads in careful gold script, Harley Street Clinic for Female Hysterical Disorders. You stand still for a moment, adjusting to the hush. It's not the silence of healing, but of performance, a space curated to soothe anxiety and maintain illusions. On one side of the room sit 4 women, each dressed impeccably in lace collars and buttoned gloves, their hats resting in their laps. None speak. A nurse, in crisp uniform, moves between them with the gentle efficiency of someone trained never to make eye contact for too long. The only sound is the faint rhythmic hum seeping from the adjoining room. You already know what's happening behind that door. The Victorian world may refuse to name it, but the walls you suspect have long since learned the truth. The mainstream historical fact that grounds this scene is this. By the late 19th century, hysteria treatments had become systematized to the point of routine. Clinics specifically for female nervous disorders existed across Britain and America. Some were run by physicians of high standing, men with impeccable reputations and university chairs. The procedures were so normalized that medical journals printed weekly schedules for therapeutic rotations. Doctors compared notes on duration to paroxysm as casually as modern physicians discuss blood pressure. You move closer to the treatment room. A nurse passes you, her face composed, her hands smelling faintly of oil and carbolic soap. Inside, the furnishings are intimate but sterile. A reclining couch, a small table of gleaming instruments, and a large cabinet that hums faintly with the power of a dynamo. There's no sense of indecency, at least not overtly. Everything is clinical, controlled, rehearsed. The patient lies back, skirts carefully arranged to preserve modesty. The doctor stands nearby, adjusting the voltage on his electric apparatus. The machine is compact, elegant even, its brass knobs polished, its leather cords looped neatly. He consults his watch, murmuring, "We'll begin with gentle oscillations today, Mrs. F." His tone is calm, professional. The patient nods, eyes closed. The hum deepens. The air seems to vibrate softly, the faint mechanical rhythm punctuated by the tick of the wall clock. After several minutes, the patient exhales sharply, her fizzes curling against the linen. The doctor, expression unchanged, observes the physiological signs, pulse elevated, cheeks flushed, and records them in his notes. Therapeutic crisis achieved after 12 minutes. Made improved, colour restored. He wipes his hands, resets the machine, and calls for the next appointment. The entire process, you realise, has the precision of a production line. The same sequence repeats dozens of times each day, each session an identical ballet of nerves, propriety, and plausible deniability. But if you listen closely, you can still sense the unease beneath the order. The patients avoid each other's eyes. Some seem embarrassed, others seem almost eager. They arrive pale, trembling, and leave walking a little taller, the strain in their shoulders softened. The clinic offers them something their drawing rooms never could, a space where emotion is permitted to exist, if only under the name of illness. A quirky tidbit from one physician's correspondence reveals just how lucrative this business became. Dr. George Taylor of New York wrote in 1893, that his clinic treated no fewer than 100 hysterical cases per month, with remarkable consistency of cure. He added, perhaps without irony, that he had taken on 2 new assistants to meet growing demand. Imagine the quiet fortune built on Victorian repression, each appointment a half-hour reprieve from suffocation, each bill neatly itemised under nerve treatment. It's tempting to mock it all, but as you stand here in this softly lit room, you begin to feel sympathy for everyone. The doctor, bound by the rigid decorum of his age, cannot admit what he's truly doing. The patients, trapped in corsets of expectation, can only seek health where pleasure hides. Even the nurse, forever silent, must bear witness to the charade without comment. The clinic hums like an organism made of secrecy. Historians still argue whether these treatments were acts of exploitation or inadvertent empowerment. Some scholars view them as deeply paternalistic, a means by which male authority controlled female bodies under the pretense of medicine. Others suggest that within the very constraints of that power, women found a rare kind of agency. After all, this was one of the few spaces in Victorian life where a woman's physical experience, her sensations, her emotions, was acknowledged at all. However distorted the language, however misguided the intent, the body finally spoke, and the world had to listen. He stepped into the hallway where the waiting women sit. One of them, a young widow perhaps, fidgets with her gloves. She glances toward the treatment door, then back at the talk. Her lips part as if she wants to speak, but she doesn't. Instead, she smooths her skirt and lowers her gaze. When her name is called, "Mrs. Denham, if you please," she rises with the air of someone walking into confession. The rhythm of it all feels religious. The clinic has become a kind of secular chapel where Sim and Salvation trade names. The doctor's instruments gleam like relics. The hum of electricity sounds like prayer. And yet, outside these walls, the same society that condones this ritual will condemn any woman who admits to desire. The contradiction is so complete it's almost elegant. You imagine the gossip that must occasionally escape these walls, subtle, coded. A friend confides to another, "Dr. Whitley's treatments have done wonders for my nerves." The listener nods, intrigued but cautious, replying, "Yes, I've heard he's very thorough." Both smile politely, never daring to ask what that really means. The secrecy becomes part of the allure, the moral loophole that allows participation without guilt. But not every patient experiences relief. Some find the treatments unsettling, too intimate, too mechanical, or too effective in ways they can't explain. One diary entry from 1891 reads, "I felt both lighter and ashamed. My body betrayed me. I laughed afterward, then wept, and the doctor said it was merely the nerves releasing. I suppose that's true." That line, "my body betrayed me," echoes in your mind. It captures the heart of the Victorian dilemma, a body that feels without permission, a self divided between propriety and instinct. The clinic offers a fragile truce between the two, but it can never reconcile them completely. You glance again at the doctor, now conferring with a younger assistant. They discuss voltage and duration, measuring intimacy with the same precision as electricity. One must never exceed 15 minutes, the senior advises. Too much stimulation of the nerves can cause fainting. The apprentice nods solemnly, unaware, or perhaps too aware, of the double meaning. You realise that what you're witnessing isn't just a medical procedure, it's a moral machine. Every detail, from the linen drapes to the Latin terminology, exists to transform human vulnerability into data. The body becomes a device, the doctor an operator, and sensation itself a kind of industrial output. The age that built railways and telegraphs is now mechanised emotion. Outside the clinic, the same logic governs the empire. Efficiency, productivity, control. Inside, it governs the flesh. Both systems depend on silence to function. A nurse opens a window, and a cool breeze wafts in from a foggy street. The scent of rain mingles with electricity. Somewhere nearby, a carriage rattles past. The city hums, the same hum that fills this room, translated into iron and ambition. You suddenly see how small this clinic is in the grand machinery of Victorian life, yet how symbolic. The entire civilization runs on denial, on the ability to disguise human need as noble purpose. A final patient leaves, her face radiant. She pauses in the doorway, adjusting her shawl, and for a moment you meet her gaze. There's something almost defiant in her smile, but she would never name it that. Then she steps out into the grey afternoon, vanishing into the fog like a secret absorbed back into the city. When the lamps are turned down and the last ledger closed, the doctor sits alone in his office. He removes his spectacles, rubs his temples, and stares at his hands. The same hands that wrote prescriptions, signed birth certificates, and operated the vibrating device that hums faintly in the corner. He tells himself it's medicine, that he is helping these women, that science has no morality, only method. But for a fleeting moment, even he isn't sure. He straightens his collar, locks the cabinet, and prepares his evening report. All treatments successful, patients calm, nervous tension relieved. The pen scratches across the page with bureaucratic calm. Outside, rain begins to fall harder, drumming against the window panes in steady rhythm, not unlike the machines. The day's work is done, the performance is complete, and yet, somewhere beyond the polished door, the echo of that hum lingers, steady, mechanical, almost tender. You realize it's the sound of a society vibrating between two worlds, the one it pretends to live in, and the one it refuses to name. The fog lies thick over the city, softening the harsh edges of chimneys and gas lamps as if London itself is blushing. Behind the respectable facade of its clinics, a quiet industry thrives, one powered not by coal or cotton, but by the subtle tremor of suppressed desire. You wander through the maze of Harley Street, that narrow sanctuary of the medical elite, where brass plaques gleam like medals of morality. Behind each polished door, something lucrative hums. The business of hysteria has become quite literally booming. Every respectable physician now offers some variation of the nervous cure. Even small-town doctors advertise in discreet columns of local newspapers, promising restorative therapy for ladies of refinement. The advertisements are careful, almost poetic, for the restoration of calm and the relief of overtaxed nerves. Not a single word of impropriety touches the page. And yet everyone seems to understand the subtext. The mainstream historical fact is this. By the 1880s, the so-called hysteria cure had evolved into a profitable branch of mainstream medicine. Physicians charged premium fees, often by the session, and upper-class women became repeat clients. The treatment's popularity was not confined to England. American and continental European doctors followed the same model. There was a network of suppliers who provided devices, oils, manuals, and even maintenance services for the machines. Medicine had found a new market, and a steady one. You picture a doctor at his desk late at night, ledger open, the candlelight glinting off his spectacles. He calculates his earnings for the month. Consultations, follow-up visits, therapeutic applications. He notices, perhaps without irony, that his income has doubled since he began offering this particular service. In a culture where medicine and morality intertwine, he tells himself that his success is proof of virtue. Prosperity, after all, is God's endorsement. A society that considers female passion as sin now generates profit from its suppression. Pleasure becomes pathology, pathology becomes business, and the business thrives because everyone pretends it isn't pleasure. You walk down a row of shop fronts supplying medical goods. Behind glass displays sit gleaming brass cylinders, polished handles, coiled wires. The sign reads Edison Electrical Apparatus for Health and Nerve Renewal. Inside, a salesman in a waistcoat gestures proudly toward a smaller, portable model. Perfect for private use, doctor, he says, completely sanitary and silent. You can almost hear the rehearsed pitch, perfected by 1,000 delicate conversations that never quite say what they mean. There's a quirky tidbit here that's too perfect to ignore. In 1902, Sears, Roebuck & Co. listed electric vibrators in their mail-order catalogue, decades before the vacuum cleaner or iron became standard household items. The ad promised immediate relief from fatigue and a convenient means to restore vigour and feminine grace. Imagine the anonymity of it. A woman ordering her cure from a printed catalogue, the package arriving by post, brown paper wrapped, labelled simply medical appliance. The pretense of respectability remained airtight. Back in the clinics, the economy of hysteria unfolds with remarkable precision. A morning might see a dozen appointments, each patient ushered in and out with mechanical regularity. The treatments, once considered scandalous in their intimacy, have been industrialized. There are assistants, nurses, even apprentices learning the proper technique. The doctors talk shop over tea. My new model delivers 40 oscillations per second, tremendously efficient. Ah, but does it maintain steady current? The conversation sounds more like an engineering seminar than anything to do with human touch. Historians still debate how much self-awareness existed among these practitioners. Some genuinely viewed themselves as healers, victims of their time's ignorance. Others, more cynical, simply rode the wave of profit. One American doctor, quoted in an 1897 medical newsletter, wrote, "It would be unwise to deprive our profession of a treatment that offers such dependable income and moral satisfaction." You can almost see him smirking behind that phrase moral satisfaction. It's the sort of hypocrisy only a Victorian gentleman could deliver with perfect sincerity. The patients too participate in the charade, because what alternative do they have? For many, the treatment offers not just relief but routine. It gives them an excuse to leave their homes, to exist in a space where their bodies are acknowledged, even if pathologized. Some bring flowers for the waiting room, others send thank you notes. "Your treatment has given me back my serenity," one woman writes in careful cursive. "My husband says I smile again." You wonder if she ever dared to ask herself why. But clinic is only one side of the economy. Outside, a secondary market flourishes in discretion. Pharmacists sell female tonics laced with opiates and herbal stimulants. Travelling salesmen hawk hand-pranked health aids. Patent offices overflow with applications for new vibratory massages. Each design tries to outdo the last. Lighter, faster, quieter. It's a competition fueled by the same paradox that birthed it. Everyone wants the benefit. No one will name the cause. You walk through a tradesman's fair in Manchester, where inventors display their wares beneath banners proclaiming modern science for the modern woman. Rows of machines glisten under gaslight, each one more extravagant than the next. One device features a clockwork mechanism that winds with a silver key. Another, imported from France, boasts harmonious oscillation for precise nerve engagement. The men in bowler hats admire the craftsmanship. The women who pass by avert their eyes, though not always quickly enough. A journalist covering the exhibition later writes that the new machines mark the triumph of modern medicine in dressing the female constitution. He doesn't add that the same triumphs have turned hysteria into a gold mine. And it is indeed a gold mine. A typical session in a London clinic might cost a guinea, enough to feed a working-class family for a week. Multiply that by dozens of patients, and the earnings are astronomical. Some doctors expand their practices, opening branches in other cities. Others patent their own machines, becoming both physician and entrepreneur. The moral guardians of society have become its most efficient businessmen. The hypocrisy becomes almost theatrical when you follow the paper trail. In ledgers and advertisements, the word orgasm never appears, but the euphemisms are endless. Therapeutic release, nervous relaxation, vital restoration. It's linguistic acrobatics worthy of a poet. The Victorians could wrap even the most intimate act in language so pristine it sparkled. The result is a society where everyone is fluent in denial. Still, the strain of that denial begins to show. Some doctors grow uneasy with their own success. A few write in private journals about the awkwardness of their profession. One confesses, "It is a strange thing to make a living from the nerves of women. Stranger still that they trust us so completely." Another writes simply, "I believe what we treat is loneliness." Those words pierce through the centuries' varnish, exposing the raw humanity beneath. Because that's the quiet truth humming beneath the machinery and manners. Loneliness. The patients aren't just sick of their bodies. They're sick of their confinement. The treatment offers not only physical relief, but the illusion of intimacy, a moment of attention, a kindness disguised as cure. For some, that's worth every guinea. We pause by a window where two women stand talking in hushed tones. One clutches her appointment card. The other listens, eyes darting nervously. "He says it's good for the nerves," the first woman murmurs. The second nods. "Yes," she says, "I've heard that too." Neither uses the word pleasure. It's as though the syllables themselves might set off alarms. The economy sustains itself precisely because of this silence. It depends on the complicity of everyone. The doctors who pretend not to notice, the patients who pretend not to know, and the society that pretends not to care. It's a delicate ecosystem of pretense, where repression becomes currency. And as long as everyone maintains the illusion, the hum of the machine can continue uninterrupted. Historians still quarrel over whether the end of the hysteria era was caused by moral outrage or technological progress. Some say it faded when the Freudians arrived, replacing the mechanical cure with the talking cure. Others argue that it collapsed under its own absurdity, that eventually even the Victorians couldn't keep a straight face. But before its decline, the hysteria economy reached astonishing heights. Manufacturers sponsored medical conferences, journals published case studies sponsored by device makers. It was, in modern terms, an entire supply chain built on blushes and brass. As the century turns, you can feel the tremor of change. Electricity spreads, women begin to speak, to write, to question. The old hypocrisies tremble. Yet for now, the clinic still thrives, its lamps burning softly against the fog. Inside, the day's final patient reclines on the couch. The machine hums. The doctor's hand adjusts the dial with the care of a conductor leading an orchestra. The air vibrates with the sound of civilization pretending to heal what it secretly worships. When the session ends, he records her improvement in the ledger, then closes it with a snap. Another day, another prophet, another unspoken truth safely disguised as science. You glance back once more at the door of the clinic. The brass plaque gleams in the gaslight. Dr. Edmund Fairley, specialist in female nervous conditions. In the city built on industry and empire, perhaps it's fitting that even its emotions have become mechanized, commodified, packaged, and sold back to those who were never allowed to own them in the first place. The gears turn, the money flows, the silence holds. And somewhere beneath it all you can almost hear laughter, quiet, exhausted, knowing laughter, from the women who keep this whole polite farce alive. By the time you awaken again, the century is crackling. Electricity has become the new miracle. Light from nothing, motion without muscle, invisible power tamed and sold by the yard. Newspapers gush that it will banish night itself. The world, it seems, has fallen in love with current. Everywhere you look there are electric lamps in drawing rooms, electric trams on the streets, electric advertisements flashing across Piccadilly. And deep inside workshops and hospitals, the same force that lights entire cities is being turned inward, onto the human body, in the name of science, health, and a little bit of profit. You step through the doors of one such workshop, a cluttered laboratory in Birmingham. Its air thick with dust and optimism. A tangle of wires snakes across the floor, glass tubes glow faintly blue, and the smell of ozone hangs over everything. Two inventors, gentlemen with ink-stained cuffs and sparks in their eyes, stand proudly beside a new device. It's small, elegant, and humming faintly. Gentle electrical stimulation, one declares, the very essence of modern medicine. His colleague nods. A civilized alternative's new civilized alternative. They exchange a knowing look that manages to say both everything and nothing. The mainstream historical fact at the core of this scene is that the late 19th century saw a genuine explosion of electrical medical devices. Electricity was believed to cure everything, from baldness to insomnia, melancholy to impotence. Electrotherapy, as it was called, became the fashionable face of progress. Doctors who embraced it were seen as modern visionaries. Those who didn't risked looking antiquated. It was an era when one could sell almost any contraption by calling it electrical. And among these inventions, none proved more quietly popular or profitable than the electric vibrator. The early machines were not delicate instruments. They looked more like artillery shells than appliances. A typical model might stand 2 feet tall, with a motor housed in the cast-iron base and cords trailing like serpents. Some ran on wire current, others required a separate dynamo in the next room. The noise was considerable, but the promise was irresistible. No fatigue, no impropriety, just mechanical precision, the perfect marriage of science and discretion. You move closer, watching as the inventor demonstrates his prototype for a skeptical physician. The doctor, wearing a waistcoat so stiff it could stand by itself, examines the device as one might examine a bomb. It vibrates, the inventor explains proudly, flipping a switch. The machine hums, the table rattles, and the doctor's spectacles quiver on his nose. Remarkable, he says after a pause. And you say it relieves hysteria? The inventor nods solemnly. Instantly, sir. The doctor smiles thinly. Then you'll be a rich man. A quirky tidbit from this age of innovation, the first portable electric vibrator, patented in 1902, predated the household vacuum cleaner by nearly a decade. Electricity had barely reached rural areas, yet engineers were already designing devices small enough to be used in private homes. Their advertisements blended the vocabulary of science and sanctity, restorative, purifying, rejuvenating. To own one was not scandalous but sophisticated, proof that a lady kept up with the modern age. You wander through an exhibition hall in Paris where inventors display their marvels beneath chandeliers that hum with current. One booth showcases a chair wired to deliver therapeutic shocks. Another features a galvanic corset meant to realign posture and soothe nerves. Nearby, a polished mahogany case bears a discreet brass plate, Dr. Cheney's electropathic massager. Inside, velvet-lined compartments hold interchangeable attachments, each more mysterious than the last. The salesman demonstrates the device's soothing oscillations on his own forearm, declaring that it restores vital harmony to the nervous system. The audience nods approvingly. A few women exchange glances that might be curiosity, or something else entirely. Historians still argue how much of this enthusiasm was genuine science and how much was theatre. There's no doubt that electricity could stimulate muscles and relieve pain, but the claims grew extravagant. Some doctors insisted it could restore youth, others promised it would cure melancholy and moral weakness. One American quack even declared that electrotherapy could instill chastity by stabilizing the moral nerve. You almost laugh out loud at that one. Electricity is virtue. It's as if the entire century were trying to shock itself into goodness. Yet beneath the grandiloquence, something fascinating was happening. The new electrical devices blurred boundaries between male and female, doctor and patient, science and sensuality. Electricity was invisible, mysterious, modern, and therefore safe to talk about. Where the language of touch faltered, voltage stepped in. A pulse of current could be described in perfectly respectable terms. Nerve stimulation, muscle relaxation, enhanced circulation. The patient could close her eyes. The doctor could adjust the dial, and both could pretend that the hum filling the room was nothing more than progress itself. You can almost feel it, the hum crawling through the floorboards, through the brass fittings, through the entire moral architecture of the age. The Victorians believed they had mastered nature, yet here they were, surrendering their most intimate sensations to machines. A peculiar story circulates in medical circles. A doctor in Philadelphia reportedly installed an entire electric therapy parlour in his home, complete with chandeliers wired to the same circuit as his treatment apparatus. When the lights dimmed during a session, his wife, waiting upstairs, knew he was restoring the nerves of yet another patient. The servants, it was said, learned not to ask questions about the flickering bulbs. The market soon became a frenzy. American companies like White Cross, General Electric, and Hamilton Beach began producing consumer versions of the professional devices. They were sleek, portable, and, most importantly, quiet. The new century's promise of privacy was electrified. For the first time, women could purchase a medical device and administer their own treatments at home. No physician required. The age of mechanical modesty had come full circle. Independence disguised as decorum. You leaf through one of the instruction manuals that accompanied these early models. The text is precise, scientific, and hilariously evasive. Apply the instrument to the affected region, maintaining steady pressure until symptoms subside. Repeat as necessary for relief. The illustrations show a woman serenely applying the device to her temples, shoulders, ankles, anywhere but the area actually being treated. The art is as coy as the prose, and yet, in every line there's a faint tremor of understanding. Everyone reading knew exactly what symptoms meant. Historians still debate whether these devices truly liberated women or simply reinforced their confinement within the framework of illness. Some feminist scholars argue that the vibrator democratized pleasure, allowing women to reclaim their bodies in a world that denied them agency. Others counter that it merely replaced one form of control with another. The doctor's authority swapped for the authority of the machine. You stand between these arguments, hearing the faint buzz of truth in both. You step now into the office of one such inventor, a Scottish engineer named Duncan McRae, fictional perhaps, but representative of hundreds like him. His laboratory smells of hot metal and stubborn optimism. Blueprints cover the table, sketches of cogs and circuits annotated with careful notes. Compact motor, adjustable frequency, silent operation. McRae's wife, Margaret, stands nearby, arms folded. "And you sure this is for medicine?" she asks. "Of course," he replies too quickly. "For the relief of nerves." She raises an eyebrow. "Whose nerves?" He hesitates. The motor hums between them like a third presence, unwilling to let the question rest. Outside, the modern world surges forward. Telegraph cables crisscross oceans. The Eiffel Tower glows with electric light. Progress feels unstoppable, and the human body becomes just another system to optimize, regulate, and power. The same current that runs through the city's veins now runs through the patient's flesh. Electricity, the invisible god, promises to cure everything, and maybe, secretly, to make people feel alive again. But you can sense the unease creeping in. Newspapers begin to print cautionary pieces about the moral dangers of electric treatment. One phone calls 214 signs to stop from. Clergymen thunder that the body is being desecrated by machines. Even some physicians grow wary, worried the patients are enjoying themselves too much. A few quietly discontinue the therapy, preferring the safer ambiguities of talk and tonics. Yet the appetite for the devices doesn't fade, it simply shifts from the clinic to the marketplace. What was once medical is now personal. What was once forbidden is now hidden in plain sight. A last curious note. As the 20th century dawned, several patents for electrical nerve stimulators were filed not by doctors but by women, amateur inventors, entrepreneurs, or perhaps simply realists who saw an opportunity. Their designs were smaller, lighter, and ergonomically elegant. They replaced brass with polished wood, steam with sleek motors. The catalogue descriptions called them soothing, domestic, and restful. The inventors called them progress. History, with its faint smirk, would later call them something else entirely. You linger in the workshop a little longer. The lamps flicker, the air smells faintly of ozone and ambition. One of the inventors removes his gloves, flexing his hands. "Imagine," he says softly, "a world where machines can touch us better than we touch each other." His assistant laughs, uncertainly thinking it a joke. But you know better. The line between invention and confession has always been perilously thin. Outside, thunder rolls over the city, and the rain begins again, steady, relentless, electric. The street lamps buzz, the wires hum, the world has found a new heartbeat, and it's mechanical. The Victorians, so terrified of the body, have built a new one, an empire of current and chrome that pulses in rhythm with everything they tried to repress. You step into the street, umbrella in hand, watching the lamps shimmer in the downpour. Somewhere behind you, a machine hums in the dark, its gears spinning softly in the name of science. The century has learned to measure desire in volts, and it will never quite stop buzzing. You find yourself sitting in a narrow hallway lined with faded floral wallpaper, the kind that curls slightly at the corners from years of damp London winters. A clock ticks with the patience of eternity. The air smells faintly of starch, coal soot, and lavender. Around you, women wait, quiet, poised, drawn so tightly they can barely breathe. The waiting room of a ladies' clinic is a theatre of silence. Each woman pretends to be absorbed in her handkerchief or a medical pamphlet, but the tension between them hums louder than the machine in the next room. They're not strangers exactly, they're companions in secrecy. Each has been told she's suffering from the same amorphous affliction, hysteria, that elastic word stretched thin enough to cover loneliness, frustration, boredom, or grief. Here they sit, one after another, waiting for relief that can't be named. You pick up a discarded magazine, The Queen, the ladies' newspaper and court chronicle. The cover shows a model of grace, smiling under a caption that reads, "The Modern Woman, balanced in nerves and in nature." You almost laugh. These women live at the edge of equilibrium, their every impulse measured, their every emotion classified as illness. The irony is almost cruel. The mainstream historical fact grounding this scene is that by the 1890s, letters, diaries, and case notes revealed just how widespread this experience had become. Women wrote about their nerve treatments with the same blend of embarrassment and fascination one might use to describe a strange dream. They didn't have the language to describe what they felt, so they borrowed the words of doctors. Fatigue. Fatigued. Congestion. But between the lines their letters reveal something else. Curiosity, yearning, even awakening. You can almost hear the rustle of paper as they write. The doctor says I am too nervous for company and must continue the treatment weekly. It is most peculiar, tiresome, and yet relieving. I feel lighter afterward, as though my thoughts were smoothed out like creased linen. He assures me it is purely mechanical. Still, I sometimes think of it late at night and blush, though I cannot say why. To my friend Alice, forgive me if this sounds improper, but I wish to speak plainly. Do you ever feel that the world keeps us in glass boxes? The doctor's method, whatever it is, breaks the glass for a little while. I feel almost human when I leave his rooms. Then, of course, I remember who I am meant to be, and the feeling fades. You put the letters down. They are heartbreaking in their restraint. No one uses the word pleasure, yet every line trembles with its echo. The clinic waiting room becomes a kind of secular confessional, and the letters are its hymns, soft, hidden, and strangely holy. There's a quirky tidbit from one such diary. A woman named Evelyn writes that after her third appointment, she felt an irresistible urge to laugh. The doctor, alarmed, told her it was nervous release. She notes dryly, then perhaps laughter is the cue for hysteria. It's a line that could have been written yesterday, a flicker of wit slicing through centuries of repression. You look around the waiting room again, and it begins to feel like a cross-section of an entire society. There's the young bride whose husband recommends the treatment to calm her excitability, the widow who comes because her solitude feels unbearable, the governess who can barely afford the fee but saves each week because it's the only hour she feels alive. Each of them sits perfectly still, holding her composure like a cup filled to the brim. In the corner, the nurse keeps watch, her expression neutral. She's part guardian, part warden, ensuring that everything remains proper. Yet she knows the truth. She has seen too many women emerge from the doctor's room with trembling hands and softened eyes. She will never speak of it, of course. She's paid for her silence as much as her service. Historians still argue over the emotional experience of these patients. Were they truly deceived by the medical framing? Or did they quietly understand? The surviving letters suggest a spectrum. Some women describe relief as though it were divine intervention, writing of peace in the limbs and the loosening of the burden. Others describe confusion, a peculiar lightness that feels both shameful and good. Still others hint at rebellion, like the woman who confessed, "If this is illness, I pray never to be cured." Outside the clinic, public debate flickers. The newspapers print cautious editorials about the delicate boundary between medicine and morality. The clergy predictably thunder from the pulpit that modern science is tempering with the sanctity of womanhood. Yet none of these voices matter here, in this quiet corridor where time stretches between one appointment and the next. The real story unfolds not in headlines, but in the way a patient exhales when she leaves the room, in the way another looks at her and silently understands. You can almost hear the rhythm of their lives, mornings of social calls and embroidery, afternoons of genteel exhaustion, evenings spent pretending to be composed. The clinic becomes their only unscripted moment. Inside these walls, they are not wives, mothers, or ornaments. They are simply bodies, breathing, trembling, alive. A letter from a London housewife named Clara captures this better than any historian ever could. I cannot say exactly what happens, only that afterward the world feels less heavy. I told my husband that the doctor's device calms my nerves. He nodded and said he's glad I'm improving. It seems everyone wants me to be calm. But I wonder, if calm means silence, then what is health? You close your eyes and imagine Clara's handwriting, the careful loops of ink pressed too hard into the paper. She's not writing for posterity. She's writing because there's no one she can speak to. These letters, tucked into drawers or hidden between prayer books, become the secret diaries of an entire generation. Historians still debate how to interpret these testimonies. Some call them evidence of oppression, others of awakening. Perhaps they are both. The truth of hysteria lies not in the doctor's theories, but in the women's contradictions, the mingling of shame and relief, of submission and agency. Their confusion is the cure, in a way, an emotional equilibrium found only through paradox. You glance again at the clock on the wall. The nurse calls the next name, Mrs. Fenimore. The woman stands, smooths her skirt and disappears through the door. The others resume their silence. Somewhere, a carriage passes outside, the clatter faint but comforting. The city is alive, indifferent, eternal. You would wonder how many of these women are already beginning to understand that their so-called illness isn't illness at all. Some of them, years later, will read Freud's writings and recognize themselves in his patients. A few will even write their own essays, quietly challenging the doctor's authority. Most, however, will simply grow old and fade into memory, their letters yellowing in attic trunks, their truths too intimate to survive public scrutiny. One final letter, written decades later by a woman reflecting on her youth, ends this chapter better than any historian could. I used to think the treatment cured me. Now I think it simply reminded me that I was alive. The doctor called it hysteria. I call it hunger, not of the body, but of the soul. We were starving for touch, for acknowledgement, for permission to feel. I do not think we were sick. I think we were waiting to be believed. That line lingers in the air like the faint hum of electricity. It's the sound of history whispering through paper. You rise from your seat, leaving the waiting room behind. The corridor feels endless, lined with closed doors that might lead to confessionals or laboratories. It hardly matters. Outside, the sky hangs low and grey, promising rain. The lamps flicker to life one by one, their light shimmering in puddles along the cobblestones. As you step into the street, you realise that the real story of hysteria was never about medicine or morality. It was about communication, about women trying, in the only language allowed to them, to describe what it feels like to be human in a world that forbids feeling. The letters, the whispers, the silent glances in the waiting room, all of them were messages smuggled through history, coded in modesty but burning with meaning. The clinic may close, the machines may rust, the doctors may be forgotten, but those letters remain. They outlast the diagnoses, outlive the inventions, and speak across time in the same trembling, determined voice. We were here. We felt everything. And we found our own cure. The London fog thickens tonight, wrapping itself around lamplight like an anxious thought. Somewhere in the distance, the faint hum of an electric motor rises and falls, a sound too familiar now to be noticed, yet still charged with secrets. You walk through the narrow streets of Bloomsbury, past bookshops shuttered for the night, past the warm glow of tea rooms, and pause outside the gentleman's club. Through the window panes, you glimpse cigar smoke curling upward like ghosts of conversation. Inside, men in tailored coats debate progress, empire, and the unnerving question that now creeps into every respectable drawing room. Have we gone too far? It starts as an intellectual concern, or so they say. The Victorians fear the machine, even as they worship it. Every week brings some new invention. Faster, smaller, more efficient. The telegraph connects continents. Electricity illuminates night itself. The marvel that once symbolized man's dominion over nature now begins to feel like its own untamable creature. When the same invisible force that powers trains and factories begins powering physicians' offices and women's bodies, moral panic follows swiftly behind. The mainstream historical fact here is that by the 1890s, debates about medical technology and morality were reaching fever pitch. Newspapers printed anxious essays about the dangers of modernized vitality. Clergymen denounced the encroachment of electricity into domains sacred to modesty. Even some doctors began to distance themselves from the so-called hysteria cure, insisting that a line must be drawn between medicine and indulgence. Yet no one could quite say where that line lay. You step inside the club now, following the haze of pipe smoke and murmured laughter. A fire crackles in the grate. 5 men sit in high-backed chairs, brandy glasses in hand, their conversation equal parts philosophy and gossip. "My dear fellow," says one, "the public has gone mad for gadgets, electrical corsets, galvanic belts. Even the servants chatter about nerve tonics these days." Another, red-faced and sceptical, leans forward. "And have you seen what they're peddling for women? Little contraptions that, well, vibrate. Perfectly scandalous." The eldest, a physician himself, raises an eyebrow. "Scandalous? They're medical instruments, sir." "Medical," the skeptic snorts. "That's a generous word for it." Laughter ripples through the room, but uneasily. None will admit to having seen one in use, though each knows someone who has. The conversation falters, leaving only the sound of ice melting in glasses and the steady tick of the clock. You realise that the unease runs deeper than mere prudishness. The hysteria treatment has exposed a quiet terror lurking in the heart of Victorian masculinity, the fear of being replaced. For centuries, male authority has rested on control of households, of knowledge, of pleasure itself. Now, suddenly, a machine can do what men were taught only they could provide, and it does so without sin or scandal. The electric motor becomes quite unintentionally an intruder in the hierarchy of desire. A quirky tidbit from this period illustrates the anxiety perfectly. In 1895, a satirical newspaper in Paris published a cartoon showing a well-dressed gentleman glaring jealously at a whirring machine, labelled Appareil pour l'Hysterie. The caption read, "Madame prefers the modern physician." The joke was crude, but it hit a nerve. Beneath the laughter lay genuine discomfort. The machine had become a rival not just to the doctor's hands, but to the husband's authority. Historians still debate how conscious this tension was, but the evidence lingers in letters and lectures alike. One London clergyman thundered from the pulpit that a mechanical age breeds mechanical laws. A doctor in Manchester warned that electrical overstimulation could lead to habits of indulgence unsuited to the female character. Yet the clinic stayed full. The more the moralists condemned, the more appointments were made. It was as if the machinery fed not only the nerves of women, but the anxieties of men. You wander now into a different kind of room, a newspaper printing press humming with the energy of midnight deadlines. The foreman shouts over the clatter of type, while a young reporter scribbles furiously at his desk. His article, due by dawn, carries the headline, "The Shocking New Epidemic Among Society Ladies." The story blends half-truths and hearsay, warning that excessive mechanical therapy may lead to permanent nervous excitation. It's nonsense, of course, but sensational enough to sell copies. By morning, readers across London will be whispering over breakfast tables, pretending outrage while reading every word. This is how panic spreads, not through facts, but through fascination disguised as fear. The same society that demands modesty cannot resist peering through the keyhole. Every sermon condemning the devices only sharpens curiosity. The hysteria cure becomes the era's most delicious scandal, precisely because no one can admit what it truly is. The picture a young husband discovering his wife's appointment card on the dressing table. He stares at the embossed like the Institute of Sadness, with a Baltic face placed on the front line, and feels a flicker of suspicion. When he asks about it, she smiles faintly. "It's for my nerves," she says, and he can hardly argue. After all, the doctor prescribed it. But that night, as she sleeps peacefully beside him for the first time in months, he lies awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what exactly those sessions entail. The moral panic, you realise, isn't about women's virtue at all. It's about control. Every accusation of impropriety masks a deeper fear that women might discover autonomy in the very act meant to cure them. The machine, with its impartial rhythm, treats all bodies equally. It neither judges nor moralises. In a society obsessed with hierarchy, that neutrality feels dangerous. In What Amusing Yet Revealing in 1898, a system that follows most of our environments. In One Message at the Right, in 1998, complaining that his patients had begun requesting specific sittings on his device. He said, he did it. One insists on the higher current, he grumbled. Another swears by the slower oscillation. They speak as if ordering tea. His frustration is palpable, not merely at their preferences, but at their confidence. For the first time, women were dictating the terms of their own relief, however narrowly defined. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the beginning of a quiet revolution. Some call it proto-feminist rebellion. Others see it as merely another form of male control, rebranded as progress. But you can sense something shifting beneath the polite surface. A century of silence is beginning to crack. Outside the clubs and clinics, the streets teem with contradictions. Suffragists march with banners demanding education and the vote. In shop windows, advertisements for electrical massage devices promise peace and vitality. The same current that powers the protest banners flapping in the wind powers the machines behind closed doors. Electricity has become the great equalizer, unseen, unstoppable, and indifferent to propriety. One curious piece of correspondence survives from this time, written by a doctor defending his profession to a sceptical bishop. "Your Grace," he writes, "it is not lust we provoke, but health we restore. If the Almighty has endowed the female body with mechanisms for relief, is it sin to assist them? We are but conductors of divine current." You can almost admire the audacity of that theological spin. In the age of empire, even God is pressed into service for public relations. Yet beneath the bravado, doubt grows. Some doctors begin quietly withdrawing from the practice, citing professional fatigue. Others move into neurology or psychiatry where talk replaces touch. A few, perhaps the most honest, admit that they no longer know where medicine ends and desire begins. The age of steam has birthed a moral fog no lamplight can quite disperse. The panic eventually crosses the Atlantic. In America, evangelical preachers warn that electrical self-stimulation will unhinge the moral order. Magazines publish scandalous illustrations of women surrounded by wires, eyes closed in blissful ignorance. The imagery is lurid, but the intent is clear, to frighten readers back into conformity. Yet the devices continue to sell. For every sermon, a new advertisement appears, bolder, brighter, more persuasive. It's capitalism's favourite paradox. What society condemns, it also consumes. You walk again through the darkened streets, the city murmuring beneath the rain. Somewhere, a generator hums, feeding current through miles of copper veins. You think about the absurd symmetry of it all. The same men who denounce the machines by day rely on electricity to light their studies by night. They cannot escape the pulse of progress. It beats beneath their feet. As you pass another clinic, you glimpse through the frosted glass a flicker of motion. The shadow of a woman reclining, the silhouette of a physician at work. The hum is steady, almost tender. Outside, a constable strolls past, tipping his hat. Respectability preserved. Nothing to see here. But you see it all too clearly now. The hysteria cure was never just about medicine, nor morality. It was about the fragile architecture of power, then constructing elaborate systems to control what they feared most. The unpredictability of emotion, the independence of the body, the possibility that pleasure could exist without permission. The machine didn't cause the panic, it merely exposed it. Historians still quarrel about when exactly the hysteria diagnosis began to fade. Some point to Freud, whose talk of neuroses replaced talk of wandering wombs. Others trace it to the rise of feminism and psychology, which reframed emotion as human rather than hysterical. But here, in the late 1890s, the storm is still gathering. The machines hum, the men debate, and the city trembles under the weight of its own denial. You stop beneath a lamppost and listen. The electric buzz blends with the patter of rain, with the distant clatter of carriages, with the faint heartbeat of an empire at dusk. The moral panic, for all its noise, is nothing more than fear learning to speak in polite tones. And beneath that fear, quieter but far more enduring, hums something else: curiosity, courage, and the slow awakening of those who have been told for too long that their feelings are a disease. The fog thickens again, curling around the lamplight like the edge of a dream. Tomorrow the papers will print more warnings, the preachers will thunder louder, and the clinics will continue to hum behind their closed doors. The city may fret about machines and morals, but the real revolution has already begun in the quiet, private recognition that the human body, no matter how many names society gives it, cannot be shamed out of being alive. Morning fog drifts off the Thames as you step into the heart of the new century. The gaslights fade before the first electric signs, those dazzling, humming promises of progress that pulse over Oxford Street. The Victorians, having once feared the darkness of their own desires, have now learned to bottle light itself. You walk beneath the cascade of posters and handbills pasted to every brick wall. For the modern lady's comfort, electrical renewal for the weary nerves, recommended by the best physicians. No one says exactly what these devices do, and yet every passerby seems to know. Advertising has become the empire's new faith, and like all faiths, it thrives on suggestion. The same society that can't bring itself to utter the word orgasm now whispers it through the language of commerce. Coy, careful, but unmistakable. A photograph of a pale, tranquil woman, eyes closed in blissful repose, fills the window of a pharmacy. The caption beneath reads, "Relief at last." The words are as chaste as they come, but the gaze, the half-parted lips, the languid serenity tells a different story. The mainstream historical fact here is simple and audacious. By the early 1900s, vibratory and electrical massage devices were not only medical curiosities but consumer products. Companies like White Cross, American Vibratory Company, and London's own Dr. Macora's agencies filled newspapers and magazines with advertisements promising vitality, circulation, and renewed womanly vigour. The devices were sold by the thousands, sometimes through pharmacies, sometimes through mail-order catalogues, each marketed as a remedy for ailments so broad they included nearly everything short of death. In one handbill printed in 1904, a company declares, for insomnia, neuralgia, rheumatism, indigestion, and feminine weakness, this device restores a balance of nature. The image shows a smiling woman seated by a small mahogany case that could, in theory, hold anything, a sewing kit perhaps, or a secret. The Victorian genius for euphemism has now reached its peak. You picture a printer's shop where these advertisements are born, rows of copper plates, ink-smeared apprentices, and a manager giving stern instructions. No words that might invite scandal. Remember, gentlemen, we sell health, not sin. The draftsmen nod, their pencils scratching carefully around silhouettes of flowers and softly lit interiors. Even typography becomes a form of censorship. Swirls, curls, and delicate serifs that turn every ad into a whisper rather than a shout. And yet, in their restraint lies their seduction. You can imagine a woman thumbing through the Ladies' Home Journal, pausing when she sees an advertisement for the pulsoconic massager or home nerve reviver. The copy assures her that every refined household should possess one. She hesitates, then cuts out the small coupon at the bottom. No words pass between her and the clerk when she mails her order. The machine will arrive wrapped in brown paper, labelled simply as medical appliance. She will open it alone, heart fluttering with something that feels both forbidden and justified. A quirky tidbit from the period reveals how deeply this language of restraint permeated marketing. One London advertisement from 1910 declared, "The Macora Pulsocon cures constipation and melancholy by promoting circulation through the abdominal organs." It featured a drawing of a woman pressing a mechanical handle against her chest, her face glowing with health. The patent itself described the device as an apparatus for the therapeutic manipulation of internal organs by means of vibration. You can almost hear the collective sigh of relief in every boardroom. At last, a way to sell ecstasy without ever naming it. But the most fascinating part isn't the advertisements themselves, it's how society reads them. Men glance at the pages and see nothing. The language is too sanitized, too dull, too technical to rouse suspicion. Women, however, know better. Between the lines of nervous exhaustion and female weakness lies a message written just for them, encoded in respectability. The advertisements become a secret dialect, shared among those who've learned to translate euphemism into liberation. Historians still debate whether this commercial explosion was complicit in repression or quietly revolutionary. Some argue that by framing pleasure as illness, it kept women chained to the same medicalized narrative that hysteria began. Others suggest that it provided a bridge to autonomy, that for the first time women could purchase their own relief, no doctor required. The line between manipulation and emancipation blurs until it becomes indistinguishable. You stroll into a department store, Harrods perhaps, or Selfridges, where everything from corsets to cure-alls gleams beneath the near electric lights. A salesman in a crisp suit stands beside a glass counter demonstrating an electromassage unit. His voice is rehearsed, his smile immaculate. For circulation, he explains, and for the modern lady's delicate constitution. Behind him, shelves display neat boxes embossed with gold lettering. You glance closer, restores equilibrium, induces restful sleep. You almost laugh, it's practically scripture now. Behind the counter, two shop girls whisper. One nudges the other and murmurs, "You know what it's really for, don't you?" They both giggle, then fall silent when the manager walks past. Their laughter is the tiny spark of rebellion that flickers beneath the Empire's iron manners. You flip through the newspapers of the day, and the trend becomes impossible to miss. The same page that features articles about women's suffrage also carries ads for home medical devices. The irony is perfect. One column demands political voice, the next promises domestic tranquility. The modern woman is being sold two versions of freedom, one for the mind, one for the body, and both wrapped in respectable packaging. A peculiar advertisement in the Strand magazine from 1908 reads, For ladies troubled with weariness of the nerves, this compact device restores calm. Approved by physicians and clergy alike. The inclusion of clergy is telling, a moral stamp of approval to ease any lingering guilt. The church that once condemned unwomanly indulgence now, inadvertently, this is its mechanical reincarnation. Historians still argue whether anyone was truly fooled. Perhaps no one was. The Victorians were masters of doublethink. They could attend a sermon on chastity in the morning, buy a nervous tonic in the afternoon, and sleep soundly believing themselves virtuous. Their genius wasn't ignorance, it was denial perfected into art. You find a discarded advertisement on the pavement outside the post office. Grain has blurred the ink, but you can still make out the words, "Relief for the modern woman, safe, scientific and silent." Silent. That's the key. Silence has been the price of progress since the beginning of this story, the unspoken agreement that allows everything to continue. The advertisements promise not just comfort, but secrecy. In a society terrified of confession, discretion is the truest luxury. You pause to consider the machinery of marketing itself. The hysteria cure may have begun as medical folly, but advertising has transformed it into something far larger, a mirror reflecting every contradiction of the age. These devices are no longer treatments. They are symbols of modernity, of the body's quiet alliance with technology. The line between health and happiness is dissolved completely, replaced by a shimmering language of promise. There's a story, half rumour, half truth, of a London advertising agent who refused to run a campaign for one of the larger manufacturers. "It's indecent," he protested. "Everyone knows what they're really selling." His employer replied coolly, "Yes, and that's precisely why it will sell. The market doesn't care for morality. It only cares for need, and the Victorians have plenty of that." Behind every stiff collar and laced corset lies a quiet hunger, one that electricity has finally made profitable. You walk past another shop window glowing in the dusk. Inside, a mannequin reclines on a chaise longue, draped in silk, holding a small cylindrical device like a prop in a dream. The sign beneath her reads, "The gift of tranquility for every household." You stare at it for a moment, realizing the perfect symmetry. The same society that once sent women to clinics under the diagnosis of hysteria now sells them the instruments of their own cure. The power dynamic has flipped, though no one dares admit it. Historians still discuss the moment advertising crossed that threshold, from implication to outright symbolism. Some say it happened with the first photograph of a smiling woman holding a massager. Others point to the arrival of early cinema, where product demonstrations played like miniature confessions, flickering images of propriety and promise. But perhaps it never crossed a line at all. Perhaps the line simply faded, erased by desire's quiet persistence. As you walk home through the fog, newspapers flutter in the gutter, their ink running in the rain. You imagine those same pages drying overnight, ready to be read again by the morning light. The city sleeps under its electric glow, dreaming of cleanliness, efficiency, and progress. And beneath all those dreams hums the oldest one of all, the dream of release. You pass one final poster on a lamppost. The electrical age has arrived, health at the touch of a button. The phrasing is almost prophetic. Health, happiness, control, all condensed into the promise of a button. You smile faintly, realizing that the Victorians, in their terror of naming pleasure, have accidentally built the blueprint for the modern world. Every advertisement since will follow the same formula: disguise desire as need, and it will never stop selling. You wait to the smell of pipe smoke and ink. A gentleman's study somewhere in late Victorian London. Outside, carriage wheels click against wet cobblestone. Inside, a husband sits at his desk under the warm glow of a green-shaded lamp. His waistcoat strains slightly over his stomach. His pocket watch ticks beside a neat stack of correspondence. He has just opened a letter from his wife's physician, and the expression on his face is not outrage or confusion, but polite bewilderment. The letter, written in impeccable copperplate, reads, "Your lady wife continues to respond favourably to her therapeutic regimen. Regular appointments are advised to ensure her nerves remain in equilibrium." He reads the sentence twice, perhaps 3 times. Then he folds the letter, tucks it into the drawer, and pours himself another brandy. He has no idea what equilibrium truly means, but he knows that his wife laughs again, that she eats at supper, that the strange pallor that haunted her has faded. If this is equilibrium, he decides, then it's worth every guinea. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this scene is that many husbands, particularly among the upper and middle classes, were complicit, though often unwittingly, in the hysteria industry. Medical treatments required payment, transportation, and permission. Few women could attend weekly sessions without their spouse's approval. Some husbands viewed it as an act of care, others as an investment in domestic peace. The quieter their wives became, the healthier they assumed them to be. You wander the study and listen to the scratch of the man's pen as he writes in his journal. His words are clumsy but sincere. Eleanor seems improved after her visits. Less melancholy, less fretful. Dr. Fairley's device works wonders. I thank Providence for science. He closes the book with the calm self-assurance of someone who has done his duty. And yet, beneath the polished manners and moral certainties, something uneasy stirs. For decades men have been told that virtue resides in control of their temper, their households, their wives. But now, in the quiet between the ticks of the clock, this man senses that something has shifted. His wife's joy no longer depends on his approval. The serenity arrives from elsewhere, from a clinic he cannot enter, from a process he does not understand. The boundaries of authority have begun to blur, and though he can't name it, he feels it like a draft under the door. A quirky tidbit from the period, etiquette manuals of the 1890s included entire sections advising husbands on how to handle nervous wives. One popular guide suggested, permit her liberal rest and, when possible, medical consultation. A calm wife makes for a happy home. The phrase medical consultation did a tremendous amount of quiet labour. It allowed men to outsource their marital difficulties to the doctor, to turn emotional distance into a professional transaction. Historians still argue whether most husbands truly believed the medical rationale or simply chose not to ask questions. Letters from the time suggest a mixture of both. Some men praised their doctors with genuine gratitude. Others hinted at jealousy wrapped in humour. My wife attends Dr. Hartley twice a week, one man wrote to a friend. She returns glowing and exhausted. I must assume his exercises are rigorous. The friend replied, indeed, modern medicine is quite the competitor. You can almost hear the brittle laughter of those drawing-room jokes. Beneath the banter lies the awkward truth. The vibrator had become not only a medical tool, but a social fault line. It revealed how little men understood the inner lives of their wives, and how desperately they preferred not to. You drift now into a dinner party, heavy with cigar smoke and piano music. The women retire early, the men remain, swirling brandy and trading political gossip. But eventually, conversation drifts, as it always does, to the mysteries of women. Have you noticed, one says, that they're all talking about nerves these days? My wife swears by Dr. Ellison's treatments. Another chuckles. Yes, mine too. Terribly delicate creatures. Though I confess, she's more pleasant after her sessions. I almost regret not being prescribed myself. Laughter again. Yes, some of it sounds forced. One man, quieter than the rest, frowns into his glass. If they need these devices to feel better, what does that say of us? No one answers. The question hangs in the smoke like a ghost. You realise that for many husbands, hysteria treatments struck at something more primal than propriety. They struck at relevance. The machine's hum had become the new heartbeat of the household, doing invisibly what centuries of marital convention could not. Men were taught that they were the anchors of stability, the providers of moral order, the arbiters of pleasure. To see that order quietly replaced by a device was to glimpse obsolescence. A few responded with fury. Court records reveal occasional lawsuits filed by indignant husbands accusing doctors of inappropriate familiarity or moral trespass. Most of these cases were quietly dismissed. The public preferred not to examine them too closely. But their existence hints at how unsettling the new medical autonomy could feel. Others reacted with indulgent ignorance. They joked, they teased, they dismissed the whole matter as women's business. As long as the household ran smoothly, they saw no need to question its mechanics. Denial became a form of grace. You visit one such home now, a Georgian townhouse bathed in lamplight. The wife, pale but serene, returns from her evening appointment. Her husband greets her with a smile that is both fond and formal. "Better, my dear?" he asks. "Yes," she replies, cheeks flushed. "Much better." "Splendid," he says, already reaching for his newspaper. Their exchange lasts less than 10 seconds, yet it contains an encyclopedia of avoidance. He will not ask what better means. She will not tell him. Their silence is the price of peace. Historians still debate how marriages like these functioned. Were they loveless, or merely limited by the vocabulary of their time? Perhaps both. The Victorian marriage was built on politeness, not honesty. Its strength lay in symmetry. He provided stability, she provided serenity. The Hysteria cure preserved that symmetry even as it hollowed it out. A curious article from the Gentleman's Magazine in 1901 describes the new science of marital health. It advises men to view their wives' treatments as one might view the tuning of a pianoforte, necessary for harmony, best left to professionals. The metaphor is almost too perfect. A woman as instrument, adjusted by male expertise, then returned to the home to play her role in tune. You can almost hear the self-congratulation in every word. And yet, in the quiet hours, when the city sleeps and the gas lights flicker, some husbands begin to sense that something vital has slipped beyond their grasp. A few even feel relief. Perhaps she is calmer because she no longer expects him to understand her. Others feel humiliation, the dull ache of displacement. In private diaries, some confess to resentment. One writes bitterly, "She trusts that contraption more than she trusts me." Another admits, "I no longer know how to touch air without feeling mechanical myself." Still, the vast majority simply adapt. They keep paying the bills, keep pretending not to notice, keep thanking Providence for science. They are the silent investors in this new economy of pleasure and pretense, the beneficiaries of its outward calm. If their wives' vitality returns, if the household hums like a well-oiled clock, they consider the matter resolved. Morality, after all, is easier to maintain when no one asks questions. A quirky footnote surfaces in one London medical journal. An anonymous male reader writes in asking whether hysteria is contagious. The editor replies, with clinical patience, "No, sir, only ignorance is." You can almost hear the suppressed chuckle of every woman who reads that line. Historians still argue about how much this quiet collusion between genders prolonged the myth of hysteria. Perhaps it was never just about doctors deceiving patients, but about entire households conspiring to preserve decorum. The husband's ignorance was not imposed, it was chosen, a comfort purchased at the price of curiosity. You linger a moment longer in that study with the brandy and the ticking clock. The husband's eyelids droop, the fire burns low. On the desk lies a note from his wife. Gone to Dr. Fairley for treatment. Supper in the larder. He nods, smiles faintly, and drifts into sleep. He dreams, perhaps, of a peaceful home, unaware that beneath the calm exterior of his household, an entire revolution hums softly in the walls. When morning comes, she will return refreshed. The kettle will whistle, the maid will open the curtains, and another quiet day will begin. The empire will march on, built on the sound of engines and the silence of its people. You step outside, into the pale dawn. The city smells of rain and coal smoke. Around you, the world is still pretending. But if you listen carefully, beyond the ticking clocks, beyond the murmurs of industry, you can hear it, the faint mechanical purr of a new century, the low, unending sound of equilibrium that was never quite what it seemed. You wake in a quieter world, the new century, cleaner, colder, and more self-aware. The fog of the Victorian age has begun to lift, and what lies beneath is unsettling, the realization that the empire's favourite diagnosis is vanishing. The word hysteria, once the cornerstone of female medicine, the justification for countless treatments, machines, and whispered appointments, is slipping out of fashion. Its conics are closing, its instruments gathering dust. The hum of brass and electricity is giving way to something new, conversation. You find yourself in Vienna 1905. The city breathes coffee and psychology. In smoke-filled cafes, men in stiff collars debate philosophy as if it were a blood sport. Here, behind lace curtains and the smell of dark roast, another revolution begins, one quieter than electricity, but infinitely more dangerous. Sigmund Freud sits in his consulting room on Berggasse, scribbling notes in longhand while his patient lies on a couch, speaking instead of trembling. The mainstream historical fact is this: Freud's reinterpretation of hysteria transformed the landscape of medicine. What had once been treated through the body, through vibration, massage, and mechanical regulation, was now understood as a disorder of the mind. His 1,895 studies on hysteria, co-written with Joseph Breuer, reframed the condition as the result of repressed memories, unspoken trauma, and unconscious desires. The womb, long blamed for wandering through the female body like a mischievous animal, was exonerated at last. The brain had become the battlefield. You watch him work. Freud's office is nothing like the bright clinics of London. Heavy carpets, dark wood, a faint smell of tobacco. The famous couch is draped in Persian textiles. Its surface seems designed for confession rather than cure. A young woman reclines there, his patient, though he calls her by a pseudonym, Dora. She speaks softly, haltingly. Freud listens, occasionally murmuring, "Go on." No machines hum in the corner, no polite nurse hovers nearby, only the sound of thought filling the silence. It feels intimate, invasive, and utterly new. The doctor no longer touches, he interprets. He no longer massages, he deciphers. Where once the female body had been treated like a machine, it now becomes a map of metaphors, desire, repression, dream. But the irony is delicious. Freud's great innovation, talking instead of touching, was in many ways another performance of control. He replaced one kind of authority with another, the hand with the mind, the mechanical rhythm with the analytic gaze. In both, the woman's body remained a text written by someone else. A quirky tidbit: Freud's early patients, including the famous Anna O, were treated first by Breuer with a form of hypnotic catharsis he called the talking cure. It was she who coined the term herself, laughing through tears as she said, "It's a talking cure, doctor." That phrase, half joke, half plea, birthed a century of psychoanalysis. Historians still debate whether Freud liberated women from the humiliations of hysteria or merely rephrased their suffering in the language of his own obsessions. Some praise him for ending the physical indignities of pelvic massage therapy. Others condemn him for replacing one prison with another, an invisible one built of theories about penis envy and infantile sexuality. You watch him in his study, adjusting his spectacles, scribbling confidently while Dora stares at the ceiling, trying to explain why her chest feels tight and her heart races whenever she thinks of a certain man. He nods gravely, calling it transference. She feels seen, perhaps, but also trapped, her every word turned into evidence. You wonder if she ever misses the simplicity of the old cure, its absurdity, its mechanical honesty. At least the vibrator never judged. You step outside into the crisp Viennese air. The streetcars buzz by, their wires crackling like nerves. Posters advertise lectures on psychology, hypnotism, dream analysis. A new vocabulary of the self is being born, one in which the word hysteria becomes almost poetic, a metaphor for modern anxiety. The newspapers declare that electricity belongs to engineers now, not doctors. The machines that once defined female medicine are migrating to beauty parlours and domestic catalogues. The cure is being privatised, then forgotten. You visit an old London clinic, abandoned but intact. Dust lies thick on the marble counters. A sign still reads Department of Novus Treatment. Inside the treatment room, the brass apparatus sits silent, its cords brittle, its motor frozen mid-turn. You imagine the ghosts of women who once filled this space, their sighs, their laughter, the rustle of skirts. The silence feels almost reverent, like a cathedral after service. In one corner, a wooden crate bears a faded stamp, property of Dr. Macora Paris. Inside, among coils and handles, lies a folded newspaper clipping dated 1909. Freud declares hysteria a psychological condition. Beneath it, someone, perhaps a nurse, has scribbled in pencil. Then what was all this for? That question lingers, heavier than the dust. Historians still argue about when hysteria truly died. Some say it faded with the spread of psychoanalysis. Others claim it was simply renamed. The symptoms, paralysis, tremors, fainting, uncontrollable laughter, did not vanish. They were absorbed into new diagnoses: anxiety, depression, trauma. The body continued to speak, but doctors stopped listening in the same language. You return to Freud's office. He writes late into the night, surrounded by statues of Egyptian gods, small relics of ancient order. On his desk, a paper reads, "The hysterical symptom is the conversion of repressed emotion into bodily expression." You can almost hear him muttering the phrase aloud, savouring the precision. To him, hysteria is not madness, it is metaphor. The body, deprived of permission to feel, finds other ways to speak. In that at least he is right. A young medical student asks him after a lecture, "Do you believe hysteria can ever be cured?" Freud smiles faintly, lighting his cigar. "Perhaps not," he says, "but it can be understood." It's a beautiful answer, and a quietly terrifying one. Understanding has always been the polite disguise for control. You step outside again, into the glow of modern Vienna. The cafes buzz with debate. The phonographs hum with waltzes. Women read novels in public, unchaperoned. The corset industry is in decline. The vibrator, once confined to medical offices, now hums quietly in bedrooms, its medical identity forgotten. The line between therapy and pleasure has dissolved entirely, absorbed into the ordinary fabric of life. There's a charming anecdote from 1913. A British catalogue accidentally printed an advertisement for an electric massager alongside one for household irons. The editor issued an apology, claiming it was an unfortunate typographical error. Sales doubled that week. Freud himself, years later, will confess privately that hysteria fascinates him because it lies between the somatic and the psychic, between body and soul. He could never quite let it go. Even as the world moved on, he continued to dream of women whose symptoms spoke in riddles, whose illnesses were metaphors for desire. The vibrator may have fallen silent, but its echo remained in his theories, translated from flesh to language. You find yourself standing in a museum decades later. The display case reads, Victorian medical apparatus, circa 1880-1910. Inside rests a gleaming brass vibrator, polished to perfection, its cord neatly coiled beside it. Visitors lean in to read the plaque, eyebrows raised, laughter half stifled. Can you believe they called that medicine? Someone whispers. You smile quietly, knowing that belief is exactly what kept it alive for so long. Historians still disagree on how to judge it all. Was it exploitation, liberation, comedy, tragedy? Perhaps it was simply human, a story of people trying to make sense of pleasure, guilt, and need within the limits of their imagination. Every age finds its instruments. The Victorians had their machines. Freud had his couch. Both promised understanding. Both offered comfort laced with control. You glance once more at the silent brass device in its glass case. Its reflection trembles in the light, like a ghost of movement. You imagine what it must have sounded like when it was alive. The hum of current, the breath of the patient, the soft rhythm of denial, turning into something like revelation. Perhaps hysteria never died at all. It simply changed its costume. The women who once lay on clinic couches now recline on psychoanalytic ones, their stories rephrased in symbols. The doctors still take notes. The world still looks away. Outside the museum, a poster flaps in the wind. Freud and the Invention of the Self. Exhibit opens this week. You stand there for a long moment watching it ripple like a heartbeat. The age of machines has given way to the age of minds, but the longing beneath remains unchanged. The same question whispered through the corridors of those old clinics still lingers here. What do we do with all this feeling? The only answer, perhaps, is to listen. To the hum, to the silence, to the confessions that outlast the cure. You awaken to the sound of rustling paper, the shiver of a new century rearranging its secrets. The lamps are brighter now, the dress is simpler, the sentences sharper. The women who once sat quietly in waiting rooms are writing, lecturing, publishing. The year is somewhere between 1910 and 1920. The time feels slippery here. History itself seems to blush at how fast everything has changed. The London air smells faintly of ink and courage. Suffragists march through Trafalgar Square, banners snapping in the wind. Votes for women, they cry. Their voices, once confined to parlours and diaries, now echo through the streets with the same rhythm that once pulsed from those clinic machines. You realise that the revolution the Victorians feared is not only happening, it has been humming beneath their corsets all along. Among the marchers are women who remember the nerve treatments. Some carry scars of memory rather than flesh. They once reclined beneath the polite hands of doctors who called their emotions illnesses. Now they hold placards instead of appointment cards. One banner reads, "Our bodies are not diagnoses." Another, "We were never sick." The crowd cheers. The mainstream historical fact here is that the early 20th century marked the first public challenge to the pseudoscience of hysteria. Feminist thinkers, writers and activists began dissecting the diagnosis itself, exposing how it had pathologized femininity for centuries. Writers like Charlotte Perkins Gilman, whose haunting 1992 story The Yellow Wallpaper described a woman's descent into madness under the rest cure, transformed personal pain into political critique. What once took place behind closed doors now marched in daylight. You picture Gilman at her desk, sunlight falling through lace curtains. Her pen moves furiously across the page as she writes the story of a woman confined by her husband, forbidden to write, forbidden even to think too much. He says, "I'm not sick," her narrator whispers. But what is one to do? The wallpaper becomes both prison and mirror, its twisting patterns a map of madness born from suppression. Gilman later admitted she wrote it after enduring a real rest cure prescribed by Dr. S. Wee Mitchell, the same treatment that defined late Victorian medical orthodoxy. "He told me to live as domestic a life as possible," she wrote. "He said I must never touch pen, brush or pencil again." She ignored him and wrote instead. You can almost see the through line between the clinic's humming devices and the yellowed wallpaper in Gilman's story. Both are symptoms of the same disease, society's terror of women thinking, feeling or wanting too deeply. A quirky tidbit from this era. In 1913, a suffragist periodical published an editorial titled "On the Nerves of a Nation." It mocked how physicians now diagnosed not only women but entire societies with hysteria. "The empire," it declared, "has become a nervous patient in need of rest." The satire struck a nerve, pun intended. Readers recognised the truth. Hysteria was never about biology. It was a mirror for power, a language for everything that frightened men about change. Historians still argue whether the feminist movement intentionally dismantled hysteria, or whether it simply collapsed under its own contradictions. Either way, the diagnosis began to evaporate, replaced by modern terms like anxiety, neurosis, and depression. But the disappearance of the word did not mean the disappearance of its logic. The idea that women's emotions were excessive, unreliable, dangerous, that lingered. The ghosts of hysteria moved quietly into new rooms, wearing the white coats of psychiatry. You follow one of these women, let's call her Clara, from the protest back to her apartment. Her skirts are shorter now, her hair pinned loosely beneath a cloche hat. The gramophone spins in the corner, playing a faint waltz. She lights a cigarette, something her mother would have fainted to see, and begins to write a letter to a friend in Paris. "Dearest Elodie, I went to the march today. The police scowled. The men jeered, but we kept walking. I thought of the clinics, the humming, the smell of camphor, the polite lies. We were told we were unwell because we could not sleep, because we cried, because we wanted." I see now that the illness was not in us but around us. They built a world that required our silence, then called us hysterical when we spoke. She pauses, taps ash into a porcelain dish, then continues. "Do you remember the machine Dr. Fairley used? He called it medicine, but when I think of it now, I realise what it truly gave me, not shame, but sensation. It reminded me that I had a body, that I existed. Perhaps it was the only honest moment in those years, a confession made in vibration instead of words. I do not regret it. The letter is both confession and manifesto. Clara has no need for doctors now. Her nerves are her own." You wander with her through this new modern world, its glass windows, its typewriters, its electric trams. Everything moves faster, brighter, louder. The city hums like a great machine that has finally learned its own rhythm. Women work as typists, clerks, teachers, journalists. They earn wages, rent flats, share ideas over coffee instead of fainting from boredom. The moral economy that sustained hysteria no longer holds. The same electric current that once powered the treatment now lights the offices where they write their futures. But the story isn't purely triumphant. For every liberated Clara, there are still dozens trapped in quieter cages. Doctors may no longer call it hysteria, but they still warn women of overexertion, neurasthenia, melancholia. The language evolves, the impulse remains. Even Freud's theories, meant to be liberating, often turn into new hierarchies of control. Historians still debate the paradox of progress here, liberation born from medicalization. Did women gain agency because science gave them names for their suffering, or because they finally rejected those names? The very tools built to constrain them, the vibrator, the diagnosis, the language of nerves, became instruments of awakening. You find yourself at a small literary salon in Bloomsbury. The year is 1918, and the room buzzes with smoke, laughter, and debate. Virginia Woolf sits near the fire, eyes luminous, speaking of a room of one's own. Around her, artists and poets discuss how modern women no longer faint but write, no longer whisper but publish. Someone mentions hysteria, and Woolf tilts her head, smiling faintly. "It was never an illness," she says, "only a metaphor for being unheard." The room falls quiet. There's a quirky historical anecdote that mirrors her words. In 1915, an English newspaper reported that modern women no longer suffer from hysteria, they cause it. It was meant as mockery, but in hindsight it reads like prophecy. The fear had flipped direction. The women who once trembled under treatment now made society itself tremble. You follow Clara again years later. She works now as a journalist, writing features on labour reform and women's education. One night, while covering a story on new medical devices for domestic health, she visits a manufacturer's exhibition. Amid the vacuum cleaners and sewing machines, she spots a familiar silhouette behind glass, sleeker now, more compact. The label reads, "The Handy Vibrator, for stiff muscles and circulatory fatigue." Jomis laughs. The object that once defined her supposed sickness is now an appliance, just another tool for modern living. She watches a salesman demonstrate it on his forum, extolling its health benefits to a crowd of curious women. None blush, none look away. The shame is evaporated. It's absurd, banal, ordinary. Progress as disguised liberation is convenience. Historians still argue whether this domestication of the vibrator marked its triumph or its erasure. Some call it poetic justice, the forbidden device reclaimed as harmless comfort. Others lament that it stripped the act of its radical power, turning pleasure into product. Oh, you must tell me that true. But perhaps that's the final irony. Freedom in this era often arrives dressed as normalcy. You follow Clara home once more. She places her notebook on the desk, removes her gloves, and sits by the window. The city outside hums with electricity. She thinks about how far she's come, from the nervous patient of her youth to the woman who now writes the news instead of starring in it. She smiles faintly, remembering the sound of that old machine, the low, patient rhythm that once felt like both humiliation and deliverance. It is gone now, replaced by a quieter hum, the electricity running through her lamp, her typewriter, her heart. Historians still debate how much of women's freedom was built on machines, how much on defiance. But in truth, the two have always intertwined. The device that once turned shame into therapy also taught a generation that their bodies could feel more than fear. You step back into the street with her. The rain falls softly, blurring the gaslight reflections into golden halos. Somewhere, a printing press clatters, spitting out tomorrow's headlines. Votes for women passed in Parliament. The future, it seems, has already begun. The ghosts of hysteria still linger, but now they whisper differently, not in diagnosis, but in demand. And as you walk beside her into the modern night, you understand that the real revolution wasn't political or mechanical. It was sensory. For centuries, women were told that their feelings were symptoms. Now, at last, they know better. The world is noisier now. Cars honking, radios crackling, factories whirring with the mechanical confidence of the new century. The Victorians have vanished into sepia, their fog replaced by steel and glass. You walk through a city that hums not with gaslight but neon. And yet, if you listen carefully, you can still hear it, the faint, forgotten vibration that once echoed behind closed doors. By the 1920s, hysteria has merely vanished from medical textbooks. The word that once justified thousands of treatments is now spoken only with embarrassment, if at all. Doctors who once wrote treatises on the female nervous system quietly remove those chapters from new editions. A younger generation of physicians calls it unscientific, antiquated, a relic of ignorance. They speak of endocrine systems, hormones, neuroses, but not of wombs that wander. The great diagnosis has performed its final trick. It disappears. The mainstream historical fact here is that by the interwar period, the medical community officially retired hysteria as a catch-all disease. Its decline was both abrupt and evasive. No single paper denounced it. No conference declared it dead. It simply stopped appearing in the indexes. The silence was almost polite, like society collectively agreeing to forget an embarrassing rumour. You picture a medical lecture hall at Cambridge in 1926. The professor, an older man with thinning hair, gestures toward a chart of the nervous system. What we once called hysteria, he says carefully, we now understand as a manifestation of psychological or endocrine imbalance. His students nod dutifully, taking notes. Not one of them asks what happened to the patients who once filled the clinics. The moment passes like a shadow across the wall. That's how history often buries its shame, not with confrontation, but with reclassification. A quirky tidbit from the archives: in 1931, a London hospital auctioned off its obsolete equipment. Among the items listed were 5 electrotherapeutic massagers, various sizes. The note in parentheses reads, "No longer in medical use." One of the machines sold to a private collector for less than the price of a good umbrella. Another found its way into a beauty salon on Bond Street, repurposed as a facial vibrator. You can almost hear the universe smirking. Historians still debate whether this transformation, medicine into beauty, cure into comfort, was progress or amnesia. Some argue it was the natural evolution of science, shedding superstition for precision. Others see it as denial, a refusal to confront how deeply pseudoscience and patriarchy had entangled themselves in the guise of healing. The truth, as usual, hung somewhere in between. You step into one of those early beauty salons, circa 1932. The air smells of perfume and powder. Jazz drifts softly from a gramophone. A poster on the wall declares, "Electrical stimulation restores youth and radiance." The machines gleam under the lights, sleeker now, silver instead of brass, their cords coiled neatly. A young woman reclines in a chair while a beautician applies the humming wand to her cheeks. "Just relax, miss," she says. "You'll feel lighter in no time." The line could have been lifted straight from a Victorian clinic. The tools have changed, the language is not. You realise that hysteria hasn't died, it's been redecorated. Its vocabulary has shifted from medicine to marketing. Where doctors once prescribed treatments for nervous congestion, beauty experts now promise to stimulate the complexion. The hum of the device, once scandalous, now soothes. The same current that once restored equilibrium to the womb now revitalizes the skin. Progress, it seems, is just denial with better lighting. You leaf through a women's magazine from the 1930s, Ladies' Companion, Modern Home, The Woman's Mirror. The ads are everywhere. Electric facial toning, your personal rejuvenator, for tired muscles and fatigue, scientific beauty in your hands. Each one shows a smiling woman in silk pajamas, her hair styled in glossy waves. The captions promise youth, vitality, peace. The word hysteria is nowhere to be found, but its ghost lingers in every promise of restoration. The female body remains a problem to be managed, just now with elegance instead of diagnosis. Historians still argue how deliberate this shift was. Did the new industries of beauty and wellness consciously inherit the medical language of hysteria, or did they simply absorb it unconsciously, like perfume clinging to old furniture? The evidence suggests both. The same manufacturers who once sold therapeutic massagers to physicians now market them directly to consumers. Their advertisements barely change, only the setting does. The doctor's office becomes the vanity table. The treatment becomes the ritual of self-care. You walk down Oxford Street and see it everywhere. Department stores host electoral beauty demonstrations. Women line up to try the newest gadgets. The word cure has vanished, replaced by confidence. The shame is gone, but the mechanism is identical, anxiety made profitable. There's a deliciously ironic story from 1938. A Hollywood film crew visited a Los Angeles beauty parlor to shoot a short newsreel about the wonders of modern electricity. The footage, rediscovered decades later, shows glamorous women reclining as attendants apply buzzing devices to their temples, necks and jaws. The narrator, with typical mid-century cheer, intones, "Electric beauty, science's gift to the modern woman." The camera pans to a wall of machines that, to anyone familiar with medical history, look unmistakably like rebranded vibrators. The audience laughs knowingly, though the narrator doesn't seem to. You can almost imagine the ghosts of those Victorian physicians watching the reel, horrified or perhaps impressed by the efficiency of their legacy. What began as a moral treatment has become an industry. The body still hums, but now it pays for its own maintenance. Meanwhile, the women who once filled the old waiting rooms have grown older, their memories fading with the terminology. Some look back on the treatments with embarrassment. others with affection. A few, like the fictional Clara from earlier, understand what it all meant before the doctors did. They saw the truth behind the polite fictions, that pleasure and peace are not opposites, and that relief is not always a cure. One elderly patient, interviewed in the 1940s, recalls her youth with a wry smile. "We called it medicine," she says, "but I suppose it was freedom. Just very expensive freedom." The interviewer laughs. She doesn't. Historians still puzzle over such testimonies. They blur the neat lines between victimhood and agency, deceit and discovery. The women of that era were not fools. They were pragmatists navigating a world that denied them language. The machine may have been invented by men, but the meaning of its hum belonged entirely to its users. You walk through a museum of science and industry now, decades later. A small display case bears the label Electrotherapy Devices, 1880, 1930. The visitors chuckle, embarrassed or amused. A teenager points and whispers. Her mother hushes her. The placard explains in careful tones that these devices were once used to treat female hysteria, a condition no longer recognized in modern medicine. The air around the exhibit fills heavy with irony. Progress, as always, tastes faintly of condescension, but outside the museum walls, the logic of hysteria still hums through culture, only disguised. Women's magazines still speak of balancing hormones, calming the nerves, finding harmony. Every advertisement for serenity carries a faint echo of the Victorian prescription for quietness. The vocabulary of the cure has simply evolved with fashion. It is an amusing yet poignant example from the 1950s. An American ad for the Relaxerciser, a vibrating belt meant to tone muscles and soothe tension. The image shows a housewife standing proudly in her kitchen, smiling as the belt hums around her waist. The slogan reads, "No time for the gym? Science will do it for you." The cycle completes itself. The device that once symbolized sexual taboo now sells domestic efficiency. Civilization never discards its inventions, it only repackages them. Historians still debate whether the death of hysteria represents enlightenment or merely evolution. One camp argues that science finally learned humility. Another insists it simply found subtler ways to enforce the same control. After all, when a culture pathologizes women's emotions for centuries, that reflex doesn't vanish overnight. It just migrates from the asylum to the pharmacy, from diagnosis to self-improvement. You stand now in front of a shop window in 1939. War clouds gather overhead. Sirens wail faintly in the distance. Inside, mannequins wear gas masks and silk stockings. On the counter sits a small electric massager, its label promising comfort through the darkest days. The absurdity nearly breaks your heart. Even on the eve of destruction, the machine hums on, soothing the nerves of empire. The disappearance of hysteria is not a clean erasure. It's a metamorphosis. What began as an attempt to silence emotion has become a culture of managed emotion. A world where pleasure is acceptable only when sanitized, where exhaustion is medicalized instead of understood. The hum persists, faint but eternal, beneath the static of modern life. You close your eyes, listening. The sound is everywhere, in the flicker of a neon sign, in the vibration of a passing train, in the steady pulse of the radio. The age of hysteria is gone, but its current still runs through every wire, every advertisement, every polite smile masking restlessness. The machines no longer claim to cure, they only promise to comfort. And maybe, in a way, that's more honest. Because the truth was never about hysteria. It was about longing. Longing for permission, for peace, for recognition that the body's hum was never madness at all, but music no one dared call beautiful. You awaken again, but now to the static hiss of fluorescent lights and the low hum of machines that no longer hide behind euphemism. It's no longer the age of brass and lace. It's the age of plastic and code. You blink, and the world has gone digital. The year is somewhere near the present, though the air still smells faintly of ozone, as if the ghosts of old dynamos still hum beneath the floor. The city outside your window glows blue instead of gold. The hum that once belonged to steam engines and electric motors now lives in servers, hard drives and screens. People no longer visit clinics for nervous exhaustion. They scroll through symptom checkers on glowing rectangles. The diagnosis of hysteria is long gone, but its logic, its heartbeat still pulses, rebranded and redistributed through technology, commerce and self-help. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this chapter is this. While hysteria as a medical category disappeared, its cultural DNA mutated into modern anxiety and psychosomatic illness. By the late 20th century, women were statistically twice as likely as men to be diagnosed with anxiety disorders or depression. Doctors no longer spoke of wandering wombs or female nerves, yet the tendency to interpret women's pain as emotional rather than physical persisted. The ghost of hysteria remained coded into medicine, language and marketing alike. You walk through a modern pharmacy, bright as a chapel. The shelves glisten with promises: calm mind gummies, stress balance capsules, hormonal harmony, feel radiant. The labels are pastel, the font's friendly, the slogan soothing. Every bottle whispers the same phrase in a different dialect. There's something wrong with you, but don't worry, it's fixable, purchasable, manageable. The pills are today's vibratory cures, little capsules of reassurance humming chemically instead of electrically. A young woman nearby picks up a box labelled Serene Nights, Natural Sleep Aid. She turns it over, reads the ingredients and sighs. A phone vibrates in her pocket, another machine reminding her to breathe, drink water, track her mood. You realise that the digital age hasn't killed hysteria, it's automated it. A quirky tidbit underscores this perfectly. In 2017, a startup launched a wearable device marketed as a modern solution for anxiety. The device, a sleek silicone band, vibrated gently against the wrist, claiming to soothe the nervous system through haptic resonance. Critics noted that its function was, essentially, a tiny electric massage. The company raised millions. Its slogan, "Feel calm, stay productive." You can almost imagine a Victorian doctor nodding approvingly from the grave. Historians still argue whether the 21st century's obsession with self-regulation, apps, therapy bots, mindfulness prompts, is progress or simply the hysteria cure's latest disguise. In Freud's time, patients lay on couches to confess their feelings. Now they type them into chat boxes. The ritual has been digitized, but the power dynamics remain eerily familiar, the authority of the algorithm replacing that of the physician. The body once again reduced to data, the emotion once again monetized. You step outside into the electric night. Every face glows with the reflected light of phones. The hum of the old vibrator, once scandalous, has been replaced by a new symphony of vibrations, notifications, alerts, reminders. The body no longer trembles from nervous tension, it twitches from digital overload. The irony is complete. The same civilization that once feared emotion now demands it on command. Express yourself, the ads say, but efficiently. You pass a billboard showing a woman in workout gear, eyes closed, holding a small handheld device. The caption reads, "Relax, recharge, reconnect." The product, a massage gun, sleek, matte black, vibrating at industrial strength. The design is militaristic, the language therapeutic. Men buy it for sore muscles, women buy it for self-care. The machine no longer hides in shame. It sits on nightstands beside chargers, normalized by design. The hum returns, louder than ever, stripped of scandal but humming with irony. Historians still debate whether the age of wellness represents liberation or the final perfection of control. The Victorians used diagnosis to discipline the body. We use optimization. We measure sleep cycles, monitor heart rates, quantify calmness. The same impulse drives both, the terror of disorder. Where the Victorians feared hysteria as chaos, modern life fears inefficiency. In both ages, peace is sold as a product. You walk through a modern therapist's office. The decor is minimalist, the air diffused with lavender. On the wall hangs a framed quote, "Healing begins when we listen to our bodies." The irony nearly makes you laugh. For centuries, women begged doctors to do exactly that. Now, the pendulum has swung so far that the command to listen has itself become an industry. Yoga mats, weighted blankets, meditation apps, every one a whisper of the old nervous cure, promising balance, stillness, control. And yet, something is genuinely different this time. The language may still reek of commerce, but the ownership has shifted. Where the Victorian woman required a prescription, the modern woman builds her own rituals. She buys her own comfort, defines her own need. The hum of the device is no longer the sound of repression, but of reclamation. Even if capitalism hums along beside it, something in that vibration still feels like victory. There's a peculiar modern echo that feels almost too poetic. The rise of ASMR, whispered voices, tapping sounds, gentle brushes across microphones. Millions listen nightly to calm their racing minds, to sleep, to feel tingles on their skin. You realize you're part of that lineage too, the voice speaking softly through speakers, guiding someone toward peace. The medium has changed, but the impulse is ancient. Humans have always sought rhythm, vibration, resonance to quiet their chaos. From the electric devices of Harley Street to the binaural whispers of YouTube, the hum continues, redefined as comfort, still rooted in the same need. Historians still argue whether ASMR and wellness culture are acts of rebellion or surrender. Some see them as modern sanctuaries, a way to reclaim softness in a brutal world. Others see them as distractions, comforting pacifiers that keep us calm instead of conscious. The debate itself echoes the hysteria argument. Is the treatment liberation, or is it simply a prettier leash? You enter a coffee shop where everyone stares at screens, earbuds humming faintly. No one speaks. The background music is designed to lower cortisol levels. Even silence is engineered. You recall the Victorian clinics, those softly lit rooms where women lay still, instructed to relax while the machine hummed dutifully beside them. The setting has changed, but the choreography remains. Society teaching the body when and how to be calm. You spot a young woman in the corner wearing a smartwatch. Every few minutes it vibrates gently, reminding her to breathe. She obeys. Inhale, exhale. Perfect rhythm. You realize the hum has simply migrated from the doctor's hand to the wrist. It is portable now, constant, voluntary, except that it never really asks for permission. The old medical ideology of regulation has become an aesthetic, productivity disguised as peace. But not everyone obeys. Online you find voices that sound uncannily like those old letters from the waiting room. Blogs, forums, videos, women writing about exhaustion, burnout, the expectation to be both serene and unstoppable. One post reads, "I'm tired of treating my anxiety like a productivity issue. Maybe my nerves aren't broken, maybe the world is." You almost cheer. It's the 21st century version of Clara's letter, defiance disguised as self-diagnosis. Historians still argue how much the modern world owes to those forgotten patients of the 19th century. Their legacy lies not in their symptoms, but in their resistance. Every woman today who refuses to apologize for being emotional, every person who demands to be believed when they say they're in pain, carries forward that same defiance. The hum they endured has become a whisper of continuity across centuries, a shared frequency of survival. The city hums like an enormous nervous system, cables and satellites firing signals faster than thought. Somewhere in that endless current, the story of hysteria flickers, brief, absurd, eternal. The diagnosis may have vanished, but its pattern remains everywhere, a culture diagnosing its discomfort instead of confronting it. Every self-help book, every mood tracker, every slogan that promises to fix your feelings, it all hums in the same key as those old medical journals. Only now the responsibility is being privatized. You're not ill, you're unbalanced. You're not oppressed, you're out of sync. Buy something and harmony will return. And yet, in spite of all that, progress hums alongside the manipulation. The same current that once confined women to clinics now connects them to each other. They share stories across oceans in seconds. The same electricity that once powered the vibrator now powers voices. Every thread, every confession, every refusal to be silenced vibrates with history. You close your eyes. Somewhere, the world still hums. Computers, trains, hearts, phones, cities. The sound is mechanical and human all at once. It is the sound of control and of freedom, the eternal equilibrium between restraint and release. The Victorians called it hysteria. We call it stress, burnout, overstimulation. The names change, but the question remains the same. How much of our unease belongs to us, and how much was manufactured to be managed? The hum grows softer now, merging with the night. The machines around you keep working, faithful, tireless, blind. They hum the same lullaby that soothed their ancestors, that all can be balanced if only you stay still and obey the rhythm. You smile faintly, knowing better. The hum is not a cure, it's a mirror. And in its reflection, humanity keeps vibrating, trying, century after century, to remember what peace actually feels like when it isn't prescribed. You open your eyes to the pale light of dawn breaking across a glass skyline. It reflects off hundreds of windows, tiny rectangles of human exhaustion stacked on top of each other, gleaming like the polished faces of old brass instruments. Somewhere beneath that city hum, In the cables and circuits and ceaseless notifications, the story of hysteria still lives. Not as a word, not as a diagnosis, but as a rhythm, the enduring cadence of how power speaks to the body and how the body answers back. You walk through a modern hospital corridor, silent except for the faint beeping of monitors. Machines watch over the bodies now, their graphs tracing what doctors once described in poetry. Nerves, pulses, emotions translated into data. A nurse adjusts an IV. A doctor glances at a chart. Somewhere a patient explains pain that has no clear origin, no measurable cause. The doctor frowns, writes psychosomatic tendencies on the form, and moves on. You sigh quietly. The vocabulary is new, the gesture is ancient. The mainstream historical fact here is that medicine has always been both science and story, its diagnoses shaped not only by evidence but by culture's fears and fantasies. In the 19th century, hysteria embodied anxieties about gender and control. In the 21st, psychogenic pain, conversion disorder, and stress-related illness carry the same undertone. They mark the border between belief and disbelief, between what society accepts as real suffering and what it quietly suspects as imagination. You remember how Freud once said that the hysterical symptom was a compromise between desire and prohibition. In the modern world, that compromise lives on, not in the parlour but in the workplace, the waiting room, the mirror. The body still negotiates its right to exist on its own terms. A quirky tidbit. In the 1990s, researchers at a London clinic noticed a strange pattern. Patients with chronic pain or fatigue were overwhelmingly female, yet their symptoms were often dismissed as stress-related. One doctor, trying to be witty, called it the new hysteria. His colleagues laughed. The headline made the papers the next day. The women in question did not laugh at all. Historians still argue whether hysteria ever truly vanished, or merely diversified into new forms of diagnosis. Some trace its lineage through Freud's conversion disorder to modern somatic symptom disorder. Others see it in the cultural language of overreactions, drama, and attention-seeking, phrases that echo the old moral vocabulary of the fainting couch. Whatever its disguise, hysteria's afterlife reveals how power moves through language. Every society invents new ways to tell certain bodies that their voices are too loud. You sit for a moment in the hospital lobby, watching people pass. A woman argues with the receptionist. She's been waiting for hours. Her pain dismissed is non-urgent. A man in a suit rubs his temples, explaining that his migraine started after a promotion. A teenage girl scrolls through her phone, reading self-diagnosis threads that sound like confessions. The room hums with quiet desperation, the same electricity that once filled the Victorian clinic. Only the lighting has changed. The truth, you realise, is that hysteria was never about women's weakness. It was about society's discomfort with women's strength, with their refusal to remain silent when their bodies told stories the world didn't want to hear. The Victorians tried to medicalise that defiance. Modern culture tries to monetize it. Either way, the pattern endures. Pathologise what threat either path from what conforms. You wander now into a university lecture hall where students debate the gender politics of diagnosis. The professor, a young woman with fierce eyes, clicks through slides showing woodcuts of medieval wandering wombs, then Freud's couch, then glossy ads for 1950s tranquilizer pills for mothers. She gestures at the timeline projected on the wall. The history of hysteria, she says, is the history of how we explain discomfort while preserving power. She pauses, scanning the room. When we say women are too emotional, what we really mean is that emotion makes power uncomfortable. When we tell them to calm down, what we mean is don't make us feel responsible. The class is silent. You realise she's not just talking about history, she's talking about every interaction that still echoes with those old rhythms. Every conversation where the body's truth meets disbelief. Historians still argue over Freud's legacy, whether he liberated the hysteric or silenced her in theory. Some claim psychoanalysis gave women a language for their pain. Others insist it turned that pain into pathology again. But the question itself, you realise, is the real inheritance of hysteria. Who gets to decide what pain means? You drift to another scene now, a modern protest, sunlight glinting off cardboard signs. The slogans are newer, but their energy feels familiar. Believe women, pain is not imaginary, my body speaks, listen. You recognise in their cadence the same urgency that once shook the parlour walls of Harley Street. The hysteria patient has returned, no longer reclining but marching. Her tremor has become a rallying cry, and yet the world still whispers its quiet disbelief. Online, in comment threads, in clinics, in living rooms, the same old refrain repeats. She's overreacting, it's all in her head. Maybe she just needs to relax. The vocabulary is softened, but the implication remains razor sharp. You can almost hear the echo of those old doctors' voices, polished and patronizing. Calm yourself, dear. Science knows best. You wander through an art gallery now, an exhibition titled The Body Remembers. Photographs line the walls, women sitting still, eyes closed, listening to the sounds of their own heartbeats amplified through speakers. The room vibrates faintly with those pulses, 100 bodies confessing in rhythm. One installation plays a low mechanical hum, the sound of an antique vibrator recorded through a stethoscope. The audio fills the space like distant thunder. Viewers stand quietly, some amused, some moved, none indifferent. A placard reads, "The body's voice never disappears. It only changes its frequency." You linger there, the hum resonating through your chest. That's the thesis of this whole strange history. Control may change its costume, but the human body always finds the way to speak. Whether through tremors or tweets, fainting fits or art installations, it keeps translating silence into sound. A quirky anecdote fits here. In 2019, an artist in Berlin recreated a functioning Victorian electromechanical massager for an exhibit on medical absurdities. During the opening, the curator noted how visitors' reactions ranged from laughter to unease. "It's funny," she said, "until you realise it was once considered medicine." The audience fell silent, listening to the faint whirring of the machine. The sound was hypnotic, almost comforting, until you remembered its history. Historians still debate what we should feel when we confront these relics. Amusement, pity, outrage, or admiration? But perhaps the correct response is awe. All that human desire, even when caged, always finds its rhythm. The Victorians built machines to manage it. Modern culture builds metaphors. Neither could destroy it. You walk outside into the night again, where the city glows with restless energy. Cars stream by in endless motion. Subway trains rumble beneath your feet. Everything hums. The sound is familiar, ancestral. Somewhere, a woman lies awake in an apartment high above, scrolling through her phone, reading medical forums. Her back aches. Her doctor says it's anxiety. She's not sure what to believe. So she puts the phone down, closes her eyes and listens to her pulse, her breath, the faint vibration of the city beneath her bed. She is not hysterical. She is alive. The ghost of hysteria has followed her here, not as punishment, but as inheritance. It reminds her that the body is not a malfunctioning machine. It's a storyteller. It hums because it refuses to be quiet. Historians still argue whether this is progress or persistence. But you can feel it now, the thread stretching from those early treatments to this sleepless century. Each generation redefines what it means to be well, but none can escape the need to translate feeling into form. The Victorians used brass and steam. We use pixels and algorithms. The hum never stops. It only changes pitch. You take a slow breath, standing on the bridge as dawn breaks again. The river below mirrors the city lights, trembling like the nerves of the world itself. You think of all the women, all the patients, all the dreamers who trembled before you. Their symptoms, their laughter, their whispered rebellions. They were not weak. They were resonant. Every tremor was a message across time, and if you listen closely now, through the hum of traffic and the buzz of electricity, you can almost hear them. The chorus of voices once dismissed as hysteria, now speaking fluently in every beat of the modern heart. They are not ghosts anymore. They are continuity. They are the rhythm by which civilization measures its own empathy. You whisper to yourself, softly, almost reverently, the cure was never the machine. The cure was the listening. The clinic is empty now. The brass instruments are polished but silent. The marble floors swept clean of ash and footsteps. Dust drifts through the pale morning light, settling softly on the forgotten couch where countless women once lay still beneath the hum of machines. The faint scent of lavender oil and ozone lingers in the air, the perfume of an era that mistook longing for illness. Somewhere in the walls, the faint echo of vibration still trembles, as if the room itself remembers. This is where it ends, or rather, where it finally exhales. The empire that built the diagnosis of hysteria has fallen. The doctors who swore they were saving souls have long since turned to dust. Their instruments, once charged with righteousness and current, now rest behind museum glass. The word hysteria has been retired from every respectable journal. And yet, the silence in this room is not peace. It is memory. You walk forward slowly, running your fingers along the leather armrest of the examination chair. It creaks faintly, like an old confession. You can almost hear the voices of its former patients layered in the air, whispers of exhaustion, laughter, indignation, curiosity. None of them knew they were making history. They came for help, for relief, for a few moments of reprieve from the tight corset of expectation. They left, sometimes calmer, sometimes confused, always changed. The mainstream historical fact anchoring this moment is clear. By the mid-20th century, the term hysteria had disappeared from official medicine. Its death was quiet, bureaucratic, almost polite. Psychiatric manuals replaced it with phrases like conversion reaction and somatization disorder. The handbooks changed their wording, the world kept its habits. But the symbolic death of hysteria marks something profound, the collapse of a centuries-old framework that had allowed society to label female emotion as pathology. You picture the last official hysteria patient, somewhere in the early 1950s. She might be French, visiting the famous Salpêtre hospital where Charcot once lectured crowds about the hysterical type. Or perhaps she is British, sitting across from a weary physician who now prefers to speak of hormones and psychology. He listens politely, prescribes a mild tranquilizer, and never once uses the forbidden word. When she leaves, he writes in his notes, anxiety, mild. The diagnosis has changed, but the dismissal remains. You linger on that word, mild. How many centuries of pain have been flattened into it? A quirky tidbit. The very last academic conference on hysteria took place in 1952 in Vienna, of all places. Fright City. The scholars debated whether the term could be saved, redefined, modernized. After 3 days of arguments, one speaker reportedly sighed and said, "Gentlemen, perhaps hysteria is cured after all by boredom." The audience laughed. And that was that. The word, like an overworked patient, was finally allowed to rest. The historians still argue whether its disappearance was a triumph or an erasure. Did science outgrow hysteria, or did it simply bury its own embarrassment? Perhaps both. The end of hysteria was not the end of misunderstanding, only the end of its most theatrical costume. The same unease, the same refusal to let emotion exist without justification, merely changed vocabulary. They move through the corridor of the abandoned clinic, your footsteps echoing like a heartbeat. A framed portrait on the wall shows a stern Victorian doctor with whiskers and pride in his eyes. Beneath it, a brass plaque reads, "Dedicated to the advancement of nervous science." You almost want to whisper an apology, not for the past itself, but for the centuries it took to unlearn it. You pause by a small wooden cabinet labelled instruments. Inside are relics, a stethoscope, a tuning fork, a peculiar hand crank device with a faded tag for nervous stimulation. You pick it up. The metal is cold, but as your fingers brush the worn handle, you feel an almost imperceptible hum. Maybe it's only imagination, or maybe the machine is remembering too. For a moment, you see them all again, the women who passed through these doors. Eleanor, who blushed as the doctor spoke of restoring balance. Clara, who turned her treatment into rebellion. The nameless ones who fainted in drawing rooms, who whispered to each other through lace fans, who walked home lighter or lonelier, but always changed. You see the doctors too, the men who meant well and the men who didn't, the inventors, the skeptics, the ones who mistook obedience for healing. Together they built a history that was absurd and tragic and profoundly human. Historians still debate what hysteria really revealed, the limits of medicine or the limits of empathy. Some call it the first psychological illness, others the last moral one. But perhaps it was neither. Perhaps hysteria was simply the name civilization gave to the untranslatable, the collision between feeling and authority, between the body's truths and the mind's arrogance. Every age has its version of that collision. Ours is no different. You step out into the courtyard. The grass has grown through the cracks of the stone path. The morning air is sharp, alive. Somewhere beyond the walls, the city hums, the same eternal vibration, now wide into power lines and phone towers. The clinic's ghosts fade into that sound, merging with traffic, with the pulse of electricity, with everything that still buzzes between control and desire. You look back once more. The door stands ajar. A shaft of sunlight slices through the dust, illuminating the chair, the machine, the forgotten cabinet. It looks almost peaceful, like a chapel after service. You realize that the last patient never truly left. She became the silence itself. Her story, their stories, linger not in diagnosis but in inheritance. Because every time a woman today refuses to be dismissed, every time she insists her pain is real, every time someone challenges the polite cruelty of disbelief, hysteria ends again and again and again. Its cure was never a pill or a theory. It was recognition. You walk away slowly, the hum of the city growing louder. Cars, phones, subways, heartbeats all vibrating in quiet synchrony. The mechanical and the human have merged completely. The machine that once claimed to treat emotion has become the world's heartbeat itself. The difference is that now, the current belongs to everyone. As you reach the street, the wind catches your coat. The world feels lighter. You think of the women who never got to feel this, the ones who are silenced, shamed, or forgotten. You whisper to them softly, the way one speaks to someone asleep. You were never sick. You were never wrong for wanting more. You were the tremor that moved the world. The city exhales with you, and for a moment, just a breath, you imagine the last patient walking beside you. Her steps are slow, her gaze steady. She does not look back. The clinic fades into sunlight, into dust, into memory. The hum continues, softer now, no longer a machine but a heartbeat. The story of hysteria does not end with its disappearance. It ends with understanding. It ends here, in this stillness, in this exhale that belongs to everyone who ever trembled and was told to be quiet. It ends when silence stops feeling like obedience and starts feeling like peace. You turn the corner. The street lights flicker off one by one. Morning has fully arrived. The hum remains, but now it sounds like freedom. And now, as the last echoes of that story fade, take a slow breath. You've walked through centuries tonight, through drawing rooms and laboratories, protests and neon streets, and the hum that followed you has softened at last. Let it recede now, like the tide after a long storm. Picture yourself standing in that empty clinic once more. But this time the sunlight is gentle, the air cool and forgiving. The machines are gone, only the hush remains. You can almost feel the quiet wrapping around you like linen, soft and weightless. The ghosts have stopped whispering. The floor beneath your feet is warm again, real again. Every era builds its own version of hysteria, its own way of mistaking sensitivity for weakness, feeling for flaw. But you've seen what survives beyond that confusion. Laughter, defiance, tenderness, the courage to keep feeling in a world that keeps demanding composure. That courage hums in you now, steady and calm. So let your shoulders drop. Let your breath find its natural rhythm. The stories have ended, but their comfort lingers. The reminder that the body's song was never shameful, that rest can be rebellion, that stillness can be strength. Outside your window, the world hums quietly. Traffic, wind, the murmur of life continuing. Let that sound cradle you. Let it blur into something softer, something that carries you gently towards sleep. The lights dim, the room grows slower. A night no longer vibrates with history, it simply breathes. You've reached the end. You can rest now.